Chapter 201. The night wind blew, and the moonlight was enchanting. Outside Changli City, Sword 2 stood in the wilderness, his gentle expression without any killing intent, as he waited for the person to arrive. The ghost palanquin appeared in the distant night, silently speeding over. The corner of Sword 2's mouth curled up slightly, his smile warm. Very far away, the palanquin stopped, no longer moving forward. "Don't worry, it's just me," Sword 2 chuckled. Ningchen got off the palanquin and observed for a long time before walking forward. "You are?" Ningchen asked with a doubtful expression. "Sword 2. Sword 2 answered honestly. Ningchen's eyes twitched. How did the second disciple of Sword City know his whereabouts? "You can't go over tonight. However, it's up to you to decide whether to fight or not," Sword 2 said amiably. "Fan Lingyue sent you?" Ningchen frowned and asked. "You can say that," Sword 2 answered. "Then let's fight." Ningchen's figure moved, arriving in front of Sword 2. Frost condensed on his fingers as he drew a silver sword aura. Sword 2 leaned to the side, his left face brushing past the sword aura. With a flip of his palm, he blocked the sword aura. The two of them each took half a step back, testing each other's moves. It was a draw. Ningchen drew his sword following him as he pressed forward again. The cold sword danced in the night. The injured man and sword were no longer as strong as before, but their battle intent had never weakened. "I can't kill you, and you can't go over either. Why do you still want to fight?" Sword 2 waved his right hand, and his sword flew out of its sheath into his hand, blocking the black sword aura. "There aren't so many reasons in the world. If I have to say, it's just that I don't like you." The black sword in Ningchen's hand became stronger. His sword intent spread out, giving off a soul-threatening killing aura. "You only have sword intent and no power. You have no chance of winning." Sword 2 blocked the sword aura in front of him and pushed his cultivation, striking out with his sword. Ningchen blocked the attack, but his figure suddenly retreated. The difference between their cultivation was obvious at this moment. His once peerless foundation had now become an illusion. His vital energy was severely hindered, and even the 3 scrolls of heavenly tomes were useless. Ningchen's moves were light and quick. He played to his strengths and avoided his weaknesses. He tried his best to turn the battle into a competition of moves. Jian 2 remained unmoved. His sword was heavy, and every move of his strange sword was activated. His powerful foundation was unshakable. It was an unfair battle. The battle outside Changli City was unusually fierce. There was no such thing as absolute fairness in the world. It was natural for the strong to be the king. Ning Chun and Jian both understood this principle. Therefore, once they made a move, they would use their killing moves without mercy. Jian was the disciple who fought the least in Desolate City. His strength was unfathomable. After meeting him today, Ningchen realized that the second disciple of Sword City was unimaginably strong. Waves of the world flow to the east. With a flip of his palm, Ningchen's left and right palm swords moved side by side. After a palm strike, the ink sword immediately arrived. "It's useless." Sword 2 slashed apart the huge wave and blocked the black sword. His genuine chi vibrated and instantly sent the figure in front of him flying. Ningchen fell to the ground in a sorry state and took several steps back. Black blood dripped from the corner of his mouth and dyed his clothes black. How sad it is for a hero to be short of breath. Jian sighed and said with emotion, "A man's reputation was like a tree's shadow." The Marquis of Jiming was so powerful that he was unparalleled under the nascent heaven realm. He defeated the Buddha in the human world and fought to a draw with the young master of the heavenly pavilion of compassion, who was half a step away from the nascent heaven realm. He had shocked the world again and again. "You're wrong about one thing. I've never been a hero." Ningchen forcefully activated his martial arts and condensed them around his body. Frost surged, and he stabbed his sword into the ground. When the snow is about to fall, the sword will snow for 3,000 miles. As the sword stabbed into the ground, the slowly falling wind and snow suddenly dispersed. The sword intent burst out like thousands of ice, swords exploding and sweeping across the world. "First move," Jian said softly. Then he fully activated his martial arts, and the sword power surged. It turned into a purple divine sword that reached the 9th heaven and chopped down. The two moves collided and the sky collapsed. In the fierce wind, Ningchen flew out. Even Jian couldn't withstand the extreme power. He took 2 steps back and his qi and blood surged. After one move, Ningchen was injured and Jian retreated. Genuine qi overflowed, and Ningchen's figure flew out again. His sword split the waves and his power shook the sky. Second move, Jian said. His sword shone brightly, and once again collided with Ningchen's all-out move. The sword of opening the sky and severing the sea against the barren city's unique martial arts. Originally, they were evenly matched. However, because of the difference in foundation and martial arts, the situation gradually changed. After another collision, the corner of Jian mouth was dyed red. His expression was still calm and indifferent. More than 10 steps away, Ningchen spat out a mouthful of blood and staggered. That's the second move. With your current body, how many more moves can you make like this? Jian said calmly, as he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. On the opposite side, Ningchen coughed violently. After only 2 moves, his body began to weaken. Blood stained his ink-black clothes and was extremely dazzling. One night is actually very short. However, if we continue to fight, perhaps I can kill you alone. Jian glanced at the gradually darkening night and said lightly. Outside Changli City, people had arrived at some point and were increasing in number. They were watching the two fighting from afar. Suddenly someone shouted, "Who is that?" "The Marquis of Jiming." This sudden shout immediately caused an uproar. The more people looked at him, the more they found him to be the Marquis of Jiming, who had been stripped of his title and was wanted by the whole country. Jian stopped his sword and said softly, "It seems that even if I don't stop you tonight, it will be very difficult for you to pass." The people in the night quickly rushed towards the two. At this time, those who had not returned to the city to rest were mostly warriors who made a living outside. When they saw the Marquis of Jiming, who was wanted by the imperial court, it was as if they saw a white reward. The crowd surrounded Ningchen and immediately rushed forward. It was said that the Marquis of Jiming's martial arts were extraordinary. However, they had the advantage in numbers. What was there to be afraid of? Stupid people. How sad. Jian sighed and stepped back, leaving the place for the upcoming battle. Ningchen, who had not retreated even when he faced Sword 2, subconsciously retreated step by step when he saw the citizens surrounding him. You can kill them. This is not difficult for you. After all, you have killed tens of thousands of people. A few more won't make a difference. Jian suggested. His tone was calm, but there was an indescribable coldness. Everyone, let's go together. After we catch him, the reward of 100,000 taels of silver is enough for us to split. In the crowd, a bare-chested man in linen clothes shouted and immediately rushed forward. The crowd was encouraged and rushed forward at the same time. The sword light was piercing, cutting into the hearts of the people who were protecting them. The sharp ink sword was no longer sharp. Ningchen moved his sword, but he could not find a reason to use it. He had killed tens of thousands of Buddhist disciples and made the entire Yinling blood flow like a river, leaving no one alive. However, at this moment, facing the people of the Xia kingdom, his ink sword was as heavy as a mountain. After losing its sharpness, all that was left was the helplessness of his fists and feet. Ningchen's fists and elbows continuously forced the crowd away. He did not kill them, but deterred them first. However, Ningchen underestimated the temptation of 100,000 taels of silver to these people. After being knocked down once, they got up and continued to rush forward. In this world, people die for wealth and birds die for food. Now that he was just knocked down, how could it stop the madness of the people? Not far away, Jian watched this scene quietly. Under his gentle smile, there was coldness. This was human nature. It was naked, undisguised, and extremely ugly. More and more people gathered around, from dozens of people to more than 100 people, until it was too many to count. This place was not far from Changli City, and the previous battle had already alarmed too many people. Jiming Marquis, you have killed the innocent and harmed the loyal. Heaven will not tolerate this. Tonight, no matter what, you will not escape. The words pierced through the heart, and the cold blade was threatening. The angry people, and the righteous people wanted to enforce justice on behalf of heaven and eliminate the scum of the imperial court in front of them. Ning Chen's punches and kicks were getting slower and slower. The blade wounds on his body were also increasing. The black blood was telling the most ruthless and cruel truth. His blood is black, he is indeed a monster. The people were getting angrier and angrier. Looking at the unkillable monster in front of them, their anger reached its peak. Facing the angry people, Ning Chen was having a hard time dealing with them. "Let me help you." Jian Er moved his sword, and a sharp sword light flashed across, sweeping towards the few people who attacked the most ruthlessly. Seeing this, Ning Chen's pupils constricted. He slapped away the few people beside him, and his body moved. He took 2 steps forward, and his ink sword condensed into frost. With a bang, it dispersed the sword light. At the same time, numerous blade lights slashed down from behind him. Ning Chen could not dodge in time, and blood gushed out from his back like a waterfall. Ning Chen's stumbling figure barely stabilized. He did not know how many blade wounds he had. After slapping away the people beside him, he looked more and more tired. Faster, faster. In the distance, groups of soldiers heard the news and rushed over. When they saw Jiming Marquis, they quickly surrounded him. "Capture him, life or death." The leading general waved his hand and said coldly. Jian Er smiled lightly, turned around, and left step by step. "Jiming Marquis, this is the great Xia that you are protecting. Tonight, I have learned something new. There will be a later stage." The mocking words of parting were ear-piercing. Ning Chen, who was standing among the soldiers, looked at the people around him who were either greedy or angry. He felt an indescribable helplessness in his heart. He would never have thought that one day, the people blocking his path would not be the northern Ming imperial court, but the soldiers and civilians of Great Xia. The bright moon traveled west. Half a night had passed, and it was impossible to travel north. Ning Chen sighed heavily in his heart, and turned around to leave. Hundreds of soldiers raised their weapons and charged over, but they felt an irresistible force sweep them away. The 100 or so people closest to Ning Chen were instantly thrown off their horses and fell to the ground. In the next moment, the ghost carriage appeared, and Ning Chen walked in. He did not look back again. The ghost carriage traveled south, returning to the netherworld. When the sky was about to brighten, Jian Er returned to the northern Ming camp. Fan Lingyue was waiting in front of the commander's tent. Seeing him return, she said calmly, "Thank you." "You're welcome." Sword 2 smiled, and didn't say anything else. He went straight back to his own tent. Fan Lingyue did not ask anything either. If she only wanted the result, that Ning Chen did not come tonight, that was enough. "Advisor, everything is ready." Xiao Wanhua walked over and said respectfully, "Thank you, Marquis Xiao." Fan Lingyue nodded. Chapter 202. As the sky lit up, the two armies faced each other. In front of the northern Ming army, 9,000 heavy cavalry were clad in black armor, revealing only their eyes. They were filled with killing intent. Behind the heavy cavalry was the tide-like northern Ming cavalry. Once the 70,000 cavalry charged, it was enough to flatten all obstacles. The northern Ming imperial court was a country on horseback. Their people were valiant, and everyone could ride and shoot. They were the best at fighting. In front of the three armies, Xiao Wanhua sat on horseback with a halberd in his hand. He looked at the blood-robed figure in the distance with a cold expression. In front of the Great Xia army, Marquis Bloodrobe's eyes were filled with anger. Great Xia had been shamed by northern Ming for 1,000 years. The two marquises, who were once subjects of the same palace, met today. On the battlefield, there was nothing to say. Only blood could wash away the hatred in their hearts. Kill! With a single order, the two armies charged forward, and soon after they clashed. The invincible heavy cavalry was still unstoppable, like a sharp blade stabbing into the Great Xia camp. In the next moment, the 30,000 elite guards of the Divine Wind Battalion stepped forward, blocking the path of the heavy cavalry. The remaining 80,000 guards fought against the 70,000 cavalry of northern Ming. The moment they clashed, blood flowed like a river. In the intense battle, wave after wave of attacks, the northern Ming cavalry and the Great Xia Imperial Army engaged in an all-out battle, and the battle instantly reached its climax. The strict arrangement of formations and the various soldier types was the best way to stop the cavalry. Although the Great Xia imperial army fought bitterly, they finally managed to slow down the pace of the northern Ming cavalry. On the other side, Marquis Bloodrobed and Xiao Wanhua were engaged in a battle of life and death. The moment they made their moves, there was no leeway left. The ground continued to crack. There was no need to doubt the strength of the Great Xia imperial Marquis. If it wasn't for the fact that he had killed too many people, he would have already stepped into the Xiantian realm. Around the two of them, true qi vibrated, forming a vacuum that no one could get close to. Soldier against soldier, general against general, their sharpness against sharpness, pressuring one's mind. Jingwu Duke and Fan Lingyue looked at each other from afar, both of them calculating. This was the most crucial battle, and they couldn't afford to fail. Whoosh! A soldier of the Divine Wind Battalion stabbed his spear into the chest of a northern Ming cavalry. Blood spurted out of the wound, attracting the attention of many people. Gradually, more and more heavy cavalry soldiers were pierced by the spears, and the casualties of the northern Ming heavy cavalry began to increase. Clang! Not far away, a long spear pierced the body of a galloping heavy cavalry. However, it was forcibly broken and could not be damaged in the slightest. These two completely opposite situations made the officers and soldiers of Divine Wind Battalion somewhat confused. The three commanders began to realize that something was wrong, but it was already too late. In the next moment, 8,000 cavalry in black armor appeared. They avoided the God Wind unit and charged into the Great Xia Guard's Legion Corps formation. The terrifying destructive power immediately messed up the formation of the Great Xia Guard's Legion Corps. The Beiming cavalry took the chance to follow up, and the 70,000 soldiers trampled over the Great Xia camp. The situation changed in an instant. Before the Great Xia side could react, they had already sunk into the molten iron current. Half a day later, the battle ended. All the northern Ming soldiers who were trapped by the Divine Wind Battalion had died in the battle, and the 1,000 heavy cavalry soldiers who were used as bait were no exception. However, northern Ming had won the war. On the plains, the messy formation of infantry would never be able to defeat the strong iron cavalry. After this battle, 40,000 of the Great Xia Guard's Legion Corps died, and they suffered a huge loss. The northern Ming side also suffered many casualties. However, compared to the Great Xia side, it was already a rare victory. 8,000 heavy cavalry, 60,000 iron cavalry, and 50,000 infantry once again went south. Compared to before, more than half of the 120,000 troops had been lost. However, the defensive line of Great Xia was also not much left. The heavy cavalry was difficult to defeat. Great Xia staked everything on one throw, using the Divine Wind Battalion to block them. However, this also allowed Fan Lingyue to find an opening to break through. Of the 9,000 heavy cavalry soldiers trapped by the Divine Wind Battalion, only 1,000 were real. They were used as bait to confuse the Divine Wind Battalion. Northern Ming had an abundance of horses, and each person had 2 horses. They would never mix the horses used in battle and in normal times. However, this time, the 8,000 infantrymen who acted as bait and followed the 1,000 cavalrymen were all riding secondary horses. The people of northern Ming were good at riding and shooting. Even the infantry soldiers were very strong at fighting on horseback. However, facing the Divine Wind Battalion of Great Xia, these soldiers were all killed without a doubt. Under the night sky, when Ningchen arrived and saw the scene of devastation, he felt a piercing pain in his heart. How is it? Do you still think that Great Xia will not fall? Xiao Wanhua appeared and looked at the figure under the moonlight. Why? What did Fan Lingyue promise you? Ningchen raised his head and asked in confusion. He couldn't understand why the Beiwu Marquis had betrayed them. There was no reasonable explanation. There's no why. From start to finish, my heart has never turned away from northern Ming, said Xiao Wanhua coldly. You're not from Great Xia. Ningchen's eyes turned cold. Surprised? Shouldn't you have thought of that long ago? Xiao Wanhua sneered. Ningchen suppressed the murderous intent in his heart and slowly said, You've been waiting for me here just to say this? Of course not. The military advisor wants me to tell you that the current you is no longer a threat. You are a cripple who cannot see the light of day. How can you defeat her? For the rest of your days, you will only be able to watch as the Grand Xia walks towards destruction, without being able to do anything. After saying this, Xiao Wanhua turned and left. After a few steps, he disappeared. Ningchen clenched his fists so hard that they turned pale. He sat on the ghost sedan chair and headed east. He knew that Fan Lingyue was trying to provoke him. However, these words were also true. The current him was unable to help Great Xia reverse its situation. This was his last chance. He had to go to the end of the easternmost land. According to legend, the end of the easternmost land was also the end of heaven and earth. This time, he had to take a gamble. In his life, he rarely did things that he wasn't confident in, but this time, he had no choice. The easternmost land was the easternmost part of the Divine Prefecture. It was more than 10,000 miles away from Great Xia. The ghost sedan chair sped along without hesitation. Half a night later, the ghost sedan chair was still heading east. It had no intention of turning back. The closer it got to the east, the more desolate it became. There were fewer and fewer people. After nearly 2 hours, there were no traces of people within 1,000 miles. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was thinner and thinner, and the earth was also very barren. The legendary easternmost land was more like a land of death. Ningchen didn't dare to tarry. He didn't even look carefully for traces of Ruoshui. He continued heading east, heading towards the end of heaven and earth. Dawn gradually appeared on the eastern horizon. At the last moment, the ghost sedan chair finally charged into the primal chaos sea. As expected, the heavenly flame didn't descend at the end of heaven and earth. Ningchen walked out of the ghost sedan chair. Looking at the strange scene around him, his eyes flashed with amazement. The boundless primal chaos sea was constantly churning. It rose at sunrise and fell at sunset. It hadn't changed for thousands of years. Now it was high tide. The sea of fog was almost as high as the land. It was extremely strange. Ningchen kept the ghost sedan chair. Walking above the sea of fog, he was indescribably shocked. There was an end to heaven and earth. What an unbelievable fact. After coming to this world, he had seen many unbelievable things. However, seeing this vast sea of fog, he couldn't help but be shocked. Suddenly, Ningchen was stunned. He saw a figure in white sitting at the end of heaven and earth. He was motionless, as if he was waiting for something. He was in his 30s. His face was ordinary, and there was nothing special about him. There wasn't even a trace of a warrior's aura. However, Ningchen still felt an unprecedented pressure. For the entire day, Ningchen didn't dare to approach him. He didn't know who this person was, but he was sure that even if there were 100 of him, he wouldn't be able to defeat this person. The figure in white didn't pay attention to Ningchen. He still sat there quietly waiting for something. When the sun was about to set, the sea of fog began to sink. Ningchen pulled out his ink sword and stabbed it into the cliff. He then continued to wait for the night to come. At this moment, the figure in white glanced at the ink sword, and then looked at Ningchen. A trace of disappointment flashed through his eyes. What a waste of a good sword. Mubai muttered softly. His words were very soft. However, Ningchen, who was thousands of zhang away, heard it clearly. Ningchen's mood wasn't good. He wanted to reply, "None of your business." However, he didn't dare to say it. Not long later, the sky finally darkened. Ningchen took the ink sword and climbed up the cliff bit by bit. He returned to the land. The sea of fog below him had already descended to an unknown place. It was gray and hazy. He couldn't see anything clearly. Ningchen left on the ghost sedan chair and began to search for traces of Ruoshui in this vast and boundless land of the east. The first night passed peacefully. Ningchen didn't find anything. When the eastern horizon lit up, he returned to the sea of fog. During the day, Ningchen had nothing to do. He could only stand on the sea of fog and practice his sword while waiting for the sun to set. He didn't know that in the distance, Mubai was frowning as he looked at his clumsy sword. "Don't insult the sword in your hand again. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't be able to stop myself from killing you," said Mubai coldly. Ningchen was startled. The fury he had been suppressing for a long time finally erupted. "I'll practice my sword. None of your business." As a person of the future, Ning Chun had been suppressing his own nature every day. He was doing his best to help the Grand Xia pass through this calamity. However, the longer he suppressed it, the greater the backlash. For a youth who wasn't even 20 years old to maintain absolute calm was an extremely cruel matter. After Ning Chun finished cursing, he felt refreshed. At the same time, he also felt a bit of regret. He had been too impulsive. As expected, the distant Mubai frowned. His eyes flashed and the sea of fog churned. A ray of sword chi appeared out of nowhere and instantly arrived in front of Ning Chun. In that instant, Ning Chun felt an intense sense of danger. He subconsciously dodged, and the sword chi brushed past his right chest, leaving behind a terrifying wound. Your sword cultivation is a complete mess, but your reaction isn't bad. Mubai didn't attack again and gave an objective evaluation. Ning Chun didn't dare provoke him again. He courteously cupped his hands towards Mubai and said, "Thank you, Senior, for being lenient." He wasn't an idiot. He naturally saw that the attack just now didn't contain much killing intent. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to stand here so calmly. "How is Mu Qingxue? Do you remember the past?" asked Mubai indifferently. Ning Chun was stunned when he heard this question, and then his expression changed abruptly. Chapter 203. Mubai. Ning Chun's shock was indescribable. Without a doubt, the person sitting at the end of this world was Desolate City's sword. Junior Ning Chun greets Senior Mubai. "Please forgive me for my rudeness just now." After recovering, Ning Chun's back was covered in cold sweat. He respectfully bowed and apologized sincerely. When a person was unlucky, even drinking cold water would get stuck in their teeth. He hadn't expected that just cursing would provoke such a monster. "You still haven't answered my question," said Mubai indifferently. Ning Chun shook his head. "No, she still doesn't remember anything." Hearing that answer, Mubai stopped asking. He withdrew his gaze and continued waiting for the primal chaos fog sea to condense. Ning Chun didn't dare disturb Mubai any longer. He also didn't dare to practice his sword. He could only wander around the fog sea. The primal chaos fog sea was an extremely special place. It was like a sea of fog. Walking in it was like walking on water. After wandering around for half a day, Ning Chun slowly sank down, wanting to see what was below. The primal chaos fog sea was bottomless, and visibility was also frighteningly low. It was like being in a boundless sea. Gradually, the pressure coming from all directions grew stronger. Intense pain came from Ning Chun's body. He had clearly reached his limit. The undying body was completely useless here. The omnipresent pressure would crush everything into pieces. No matter what kind of special physique one possessed, it would be useless here. Just as Ning Chun was about to reach his limit and float up, he saw an exceptionally dense fog floating not far below him. It was extremely strange. This sudden sight piqued Ning Chun's curiosity. He endured the pain in his body and sank down once more. The closer they got, the clearer the fog became. The dark gray vortex, about 10 zhang in diameter, slowly rotated. At the center, snow-like things began to condense. It was extremely strange. Ning Chun stretched out his hand to touch it. However, when he touched the outermost part of the fog, he couldn't go any further. "What the hell is this?" A strange light flashed in Ning Chun's eyes. This fog was clearly different from the surrounding fog. It was condensing from all directions toward the center. The pressure around him grew stronger. Ning Chun didn't dare to stay any longer and quickly floated up. It was already late in the world. Mubai was still sitting there waiting. He paid no attention to anything else. Not long after Ning Chun came up, the sea of fog began to sink and soon disappeared from sight. When night fell, Ning Chun went out to look for Ruoshui again. The easternmost land was too big. It was not possible to find a river in a day or two. That night, Ning Chun also gained nothing. Before dawn, he returned to the sea of fog. Inside and outside the world, the two of them were like two parallel lines, neither of them paying attention to the other. Ning Chun didn't dare, but Mubai didn't care at all. In the heart of the sword and desolate city, there was only the sword. Nothing else was important. During the day, Ning Chun had nothing else to do, so he sank into the sea of fog and observed the changes in the fog. His intuition told him that this thing was definitely not simple. A martial artist's intuition was like a woman's sixth sense. Sometimes it was more important than anything else. The fog vortex continued to shrink, from 10 zhang to 8 zhang. The solidified part in the center was also increasing. It was obvious that this huge vortex must have been shockingly huge at the beginning, and now it was at its final moment. For the next 7 days, Ning Chen would go out to look for Ruo Shui at sunset. When the day came, he would sink into the sea of fog to observe this strange phenomenon. On the 8th day, when the vortex had shrunk to 3 zhang, its speed suddenly slowed down. The gray solid in the center was gathering faster and faster, growing rapidly like an ice crystal. Light flashed in Ning Chen's eyes. Without a doubt, he had found something incredible. It should be very soon before this thing was fully formed. He also wanted to see what it would look like when it was fully formed. After another 3 days, Ning Chen had searched more than half of the easternmost land. Then he stopped for the night. He knew that the thing in the depths of the sea of fog would be fully formed tonight. At the end of the world, Mu Bai, who had been sitting quietly, also stood up. Looking at the sea of fog 30 zhang below, his aura slowly awakened. It was like a peerless sharp sword being unsheathed. Even the world lost its color. Ning Chen stood in the distance, looking at desolate city's unsheathed sword with a stern expression. In the world, if there was someone who had the deepest understanding of the sword, it would definitely be Mu Bai. At this moment, 30 zhang below, the sea of fog rose violently with the sunset. Not long after, it appeared in front of the two again. The sea of fog changed and lightning descended. Terrifying lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, turning the sea of fog in front of them into a sea of lightning. In the next moment, Mu Bai moved. He only pointed a finger, and in an instant, everything seemed to have stopped. An indescribable sword light appeared. At first it was very small, but as it moved forward, it became more and more powerful. In the end, it turned into a sword that could cut the sky. With a loud bang, it slashed apart the sea of fog and lightning. In the distance, Ning Chen looked at this shocking sword. He was extremely shocked. Is this the sword? If one hears the Tao in the morning, one can die in the evening. The Tao of the sword was so brilliant that it made people intoxicated. In the past, he didn't understand why so many sages spent their lives trying to prove their Tao. Today, after seeing Mu Bai's sword, he understood its endless charm. In the sea of fog that was slashed apart, an apricot tree-like dark gray ice crystal appeared. It was flawless and intoxicating. Ning Chen suppressed his urge to snatch it with great difficulty. His eyes burned as he looked at this unique treasure. In the distance, Mu Bai walked step by step in front of the ice crystal. With a wave of his hand, he scattered it. Ning Chen was stunned. He didn't understand what was going on. Isn't this a wastrel? Wrong again. Mu Bai lightly sighed. He waved his hand and sent the ice crystal back into the sea of fog. He then walked back and waited for the next appearance. Ning Chen found it hard to understand. He looked at Mu Bai and gathered his courage to ask, "Senior Mu Bai, why are you doing this?" Mu Bai indifferently said, "I want to forge a sword, not a tree." Hearing this reply, Ning Chen's heart still ached. He said, "When the sword reaches the pinnacle, can't anything be used as a sword?" Mu Bai looked at him like he was looking at an idiot. He slowly said, "Who taught you such nonsense? A sword is a sword. Nothing can replace it." Ning Chen really wanted to say that it was written in the books of his previous life. However, he swallowed his words. There are so many things in the world. How long do you want to wait for a sword to appear? Ning Chen couldn't help but ask. "I don't know." Mu Bai shook his head and said, "Maybe 10 years, maybe 100 years, maybe 1,000 years. There will be a day when it will appear." When the primal chaos took form, there would be a moment when it was at its weakest. This was also the only time to forge a sword. Unfortunately, after several attempts, he still didn't see the sword embryo he wanted. Ning Chen didn't know what to say. This kind of perseverance was truly unique in the world. Sitting here waiting for a sword that might not appear was inconceivable. "Senior Mu Bai, Junior wants to ask you, have you seen Ruo Shui in the easternmost land?" Ning Chen didn't want to miss this rare opportunity to speak. He hurriedly asked. Mu Bai frowned. He thought for a moment and said, "I think so. It's just that it's been too long, and I can't remember where it is." Ning Chen was happy at first. But he was so angry that he wanted to bang his head against the wall. If that was the case, he would have to continue searching aimlessly. The easternmost land was too big. It was connected to the end of the world. It wasn't strange for Ruoshui to appear anywhere. Senior Mubai, have you broken through to the Xiantian realm? It was already late. It was too late to go out and search. Ning Chen sat at the end of the world and asked the question that the whole world was wondering. I don't know, Mubai calmly said. Ning Chen was helpless. This kind of conversation was very difficult to continue. Senior Mubai, is my sword really that bad? It's unsightly. Mubai honestly replied. Senior Mubai, how do your 3 disciples' sword cultivations compare to mine? Ning Chen asked in boredom. Other than Jianyi, the other 2 are about the same as you. Mubai replied. What about Mu Qingxue? Ning Chen asked. She doesn't walk the sword Dao. To her the sword is just a sharp weapon. Mubai replied. Aren't you angry? Everyone has their own Dao. She's not suited to walk the sword Dao. She can't force herself to walk it. That night, Ning Chen asked many questions. Mubai was surprisingly patient and answered them one by one. Perhaps it was because he had been lonely for too long. Or perhaps he found Ning Chen pleasing to the eye. Ning Chen couldn't say why. In any case, this kind of opportunity would only come once in a lifetime. In truth, his relationship with Desolate City really wasn't that good. Jian Luiying had tried to kill him several times. Jian Er had also fought with him. And even Mu Qingxue was waiting for the day he could kill him. Other than Jian Yi, who he had never met, he had fought with all of Desolate City's successors. Senior Mubai, have you ever hated Great Xia? Ning Chen calmed down and asked seriously. Dynasties change. That's unavoidable. Why would I hate it? Mubai asked back. Ning Chen didn't know what to say. Everyone knew this principle, but if it really happened to him, who would be able to accept it? The sun was about to shine down from the east. Ning Chen stood up and walked into the sea of fog. You can't see the light? This was the first time Mubai had taken the initiative to ask. Yes. Ning Chen nodded. Do you regret it? Mubai calmly asked. No. Ning Chen shook his head. Mubai nodded. You have the qualifications to use the sword. After saying that, Mubai didn't say anything else. He sat at the end of the world, waiting for the next manifestation to appear. Having obtained permission, Ning Chen began to diligently practice his sword in the sea of fog. With his current body, he was unable to cultivate, so he could only practice his sword. His ink sword's brilliance flashed through the sea of fog. Each move was merciless and cold, bringing with it a sharp killing intent. The surrounding sea of fog was violently tossed and turned by the sword light. Suddenly Mubai raised his hand. Heaven and earth froze. A sword appeared in front of him in an instant. Ning Chen was shocked. He wanted to dodge, but his body didn't listen to him. He was unable to move. The instant the sword touched his body, it completely dissipated. The restrictions on Ning Chen's body disappeared. His heart throbbed and cold sweat poured out. Just now, he had truly felt the aura of death. It had been so close. Many thanks for seniors' pointers. Chapter 204. Ning Chen stood in the middle of the sea of fog, carefully recalling the previous sword strike. Only after experiencing it personally did he know how terrifying it was. He couldn't dodge it, couldn't block it, and didn't even have the chance to react. At that moment, it was as if heaven and earth were frozen, not moving at all. Mubai didn't say anything. That sword strike was for Mu Qingxue, and it was also the only thing he could do as an elder. As for how much the young man in front of him could comprehend, it wasn't something he needed to consider. Ning Chen was indeed stumped. For an entire day, his brows were tightly knitted, not relaxing at all. After experiencing that sword strike, Ning Chen could no longer use the ink sword in his hand. He realized that he didn't know how to use a sword anymore. When night fell, the ink sword returned to its scabbard. Ning Chen went to search for traces of Ruoshui. He didn't know how to use a sword, and carrying this sword would only increase his burden. In the following 3 days, Ning Chen didn't use the ink sword again. He stood in the middle of the sea of fog, recalling that sword strike. His brows were tightly knitted, and he didn't move at all, as if he was possessed. Or did he go wrong? Under the chaotic sea of fog, an even bigger whirlpool was constantly rotating, and something new was forming. However, he didn't know what it was this time. After that night, Mubai didn't say a word. He just sat there quietly waiting. On the fourth day, Ning Chun tried to pull out the ink sword. However, after trying a few times, he still didn't know how to use it. Heaven and earth couldn't be frozen. He had this feeling without a doubt, it was an illusion. At that moment, he also felt that his body was out of control, as if his spirit and body were separated. It was fast but not completely. That sword strike was clearly slower than Mu Qingshue's. But he didn't have this feeling when facing Mu Qingxue. Just like the sword strike Mu Bai used to cut open the sea of fog, it was clearly weak at the beginning, but it became stronger and stronger, and finally became an unstoppable sword strike. Time passed little by little. When the sun was about to set, Ning Chun, who had been silent all this time, slowly raised the ink sword in his hand. Immediately, the sea of fog began to churn violently. Before the sword was drawn, the sword intent had already taken the lead. A moment later, the sword swept out, and the 3 feet tall sea of fog was instantly separated. Oh! With a light sigh of praise, a hint of approval flashed through Mu Bai's eyes. Although his comprehension was ordinary, his concentration was not bad. After comprehending for so long, he finally managed to make his first strike. The true intent of the sword was fast, accurate and focused. If one were to purely pursue moves, they would only go further and further. People in this world placed too much emphasis on moves, and neglected the essence of the essence. The more complicated the sword move, the more energy it would waste. In the beginning, the true meaning of the sword only existed in this simple thrust. If he couldn't even execute the first sword move properly, it would be equivalent to learning nothing after 100 years of swordsmanship. 3 feet was the length of a sword. It was also the beginning of learning the sword. He had been learning the sword for 40 years, and only then was he able to open up 10,000 feet of primordial chaos. It was already not bad for this child to be able to open up 3 feet on his first strike. He remembered that in the past, Sword 2's first sword opened the barren river, similarly opening up 3 feet. Sword 3 still hadn't done it yet. Only Sword 1's comprehension was the highest, opening up 13 feet on his first sword. Mu Qingxue did not cultivate the way of the sword. However, his talent and comprehension were hard to find in the past and present. With one sword, he cut off the desolate river that was 1,000 feet long. Within the primal chaos fog sea, Ning Chun was naturally unaware of all this. He looked at the ink sword in his hand and fell into deep thought. He seemed to have understood some things, but there were still many things he didn't understand. He could open up 3 feet of primordial chaos, but it was only 3 feet. In front of the sword, he couldn't even open up an inch. On this night, after Ning Chun reached the land, he held his sword and bowed respectfully towards Mu Bai. Senior Mu Bai, this junior has to leave. Once again, thank you for your guidance. Last night, he had already discovered the traces of Ruoshui. After tonight, regardless of whether he could find the Permitha flower or not, he would not return. Mu Bai did not reply. He had already said what he needed to say in one night. There was nothing else to say. Ning Chun sat on the ghost palanquin and left. He sheathed his ink sword and placed it behind his waist. In the extreme east, there was still a place he had yet to search. Last night, he saw the traces of Ruoshui flowing through a canyon. However, there wasn't much time left, so he didn't go in to search. The ghost palanquin traveled in the southwest direction. When the bright moon was hanging high in the sky, they arrived at the canyon. There was nothing in the barren canyon. It was a desolate and boundless place. After 100 miles into the canyon, the surroundings became even more barren. There was no life, no sound. There was only an eternal silence. He was so familiar with this scene. It was almost the same as the underworld. It was cold, silent, and lifeless. Under the cliff of the canyon, there were traces of Ruoshui flowing past. However, the Ruoshui had already dried up. Ning Chun was puzzled. If this was the source of Ruoshui, why would it dry up? Ruoshui was different from ordinary water. It would not evaporate. As long as no one moved it away, it would never disappear. After another 100 miles, The traces left behind by Ruoxue started to move upwards along the cliff. It extended to a place where the eyes could not see. Ning Chun had no other choice. He could only follow the traces of Ruoxue and see if he could find the traces of the Permitha flower. The mountain path was rugged and difficult to travel. However, to the ghost palanquin, it didn't have much of an impact. After an hour, a bright red flower suddenly appeared on a rock far away. Under the night sky, it stood alone proudly. Ning Chen's expression became joyful. He rushed forward. Almost at the same time, a familiar figure appeared and rushed forward. When the two of them grabbed the Permitha flower, they looked at each other and immediately sent out a palm strike without hesitation. God's child. Jiming Marquis. The two who were knocked back at the same time were surprised at first, and then boundless battle intent erupted. What an unexpected fate, sighed Jun Shaoqing. No matter what, he had never imagined that the young man he had knocked off a cliff with a single palm strike would cause such a huge commotion. God's child's glory is also unforgettable, said Ning Chen calmly. It could be said that God's child had allowed him to experience the power of a martial arts expert for the first time. After that, thanks to God's child, he had been in a wheelchair for several months. You're also looking for the Permitha flower? Asked Jun Shaoqing. Yes. Ning Chen nodded. The Permitha flower bloomed magnificently on the rock. The two of them were only 10 steps apart, but neither of them dared to move. If you hand over your birth scroll, I can let you have the Permitha flower, said Jun Shaoqing slowly. Do you think that's possible? Asked Ning Chen. The two of them talked calmly without the slightest anger. It was like old friends catching up on old times. However, the conversation would always end. When they met again, the two of them were still enemies. Since we can't see eye to eye, let's see who's stronger. Jun Shaoqing's expression turned cold. The air pressure around them immediately dropped. A powerful aura surged and spread continuously. Its power was astonishing. Ning Chen's expression also became serious. God's child had been known as the strongest person below the Khanate stage for a long time. Now that they met again, he seemed to be even stronger. He had seen many peak experts below the Khanate stage, such as Underworld Child, Xiazi, and Mu Qianshang, before he stepped into the Khanate stage. Among these people, God's child was undoubtedly the most outstanding. If it wasn't for that woman, God's child might be the strongest Heaven's Reach expert he had ever seen. The black sword behind Ning Chen trembled slightly. The aura around him slowly circulated, and the corresponding pain came with it. Since he couldn't fight for a long time, he would end it quickly. The aura of his sword finger was condensed. Ning Chen's feet moved first. His sword finger broke through the air, drawing a silver flowing light, heading straight for God's child's heart. Jun Shaoqing moved sideways, and the silver flowing light changed direction at the same time. It streaked across, creating a dazzling snowy light. Ning Chen used speed to meet strength, trying not to give Jun Shaoqing a chance to fight back. On his sword finger, the silver brilliance condensed into frost, sprinkling out one sharp killing light after another. Jun Shaoqing moved his feet, avoiding the sword light. At the same time, he gathered Zhen Yuan in his palm and sent it out. Finger and palm collided. Ning Chen endured some of his injuries. Sword chi came out of his finger and instantly broke God's child's palm. Jun Shaoqing frowned. He circulated his martial arts and pushed Ning Chen away with the palm. You shouldn't be so weak, Jun Shaoqing said slowly. The foundation built by the life scroll was unparalleled in the world. But he couldn't feel the absolute power in Ning Chen's moves. In the world, almost all moves were driven by Jin Qi. But Ning Chen gave him the feeling that although his moves were exquisite, they lacked momentum. Seeing you again, you have disappointed me. As soon as he finished speaking, Jun Shaoqing raised his hand and summoned a change in heaven and earth. Thunder and lightning covered the surroundings. Amidst the raging winds, another world-shaking move appeared. The God's child's hand rumbled with thunder, shaking heaven and earth. Its power was so terrifying that it wanted to tear heaven and earth apart. Dark thunder appeared again. Heaven and earth shook, and the world turned upside down. Above the canyon, the mountain collapsed. The opportunity had arrived. Behind Ning Chen, the black sword flew out. In an instant, Ning Chen dashed out, grabbing the black sword. 3 feet of forbidden ground, a sword slashed open the heavens. The sword pierced his heart. Jun Shaoqing grabbed the black sword. Enduring the pain, he used his right hand to forcefully counterattack. Thunder surged and with a boom, he sent the person in front of him flying. Ning Chun landed on the ground and took a few steps back. He coughed up a mouthful of blood and stabilized himself. Sword qi entered his body. Jun Shaoqing's blood and qi churned violently. He circulated his martial arts and forcibly suppressed the sword qi in his heart. "You've seen Baron City's sword," said Jun Shaoqing hoarsely. "Is that important?" Ning Chun leaned on the sword and said coldly, "I was careless this time. Next time, you won't be so lucky." Jun Shaoqing took a step forward and turned into a beam of light, disappearing into the night. Ning Chun didn't chase after him. Leaning on his sword, he walked step by step to the hurricane lily. He gently plucked it and left on the ghost palanquin. God's child was worthy of being called God's child. If it had been anyone else, they definitely wouldn't have been able to react in time. Jun Shaoqing had been able to grab the black sword at the last moment. This kind of reaction time was rare in the world. Unfortunately, he hadn't been able to get rid of him here. He was very clear that God's child was very close to the Xiantian realm. If he missed this opportunity, the next time they met would be even more difficult. The ghost palanquin was extremely fast. It was different from when it had come. Now its back was facing the rising sun, so it would have more time. At the end of the world, the first rays of dawn shone on Mu Bai's body. Then it quickly spread from east to west. The sky and earth began to light up from east to west. The ghost palanquin sped forward, racing against time. In the far east, the dividing line between day and night continued westward. At this moment, it was like the mortal world in hell. It seemed far away, but in reality, it was just inches away. Chapter 205. The first rays of the morning sun traveled to the west, and the ghost palanquin sped along, constantly racing between life and death. The surrounding scenery flashed by in the blink of an eye. The misty forest was right in front of them, and the first rays of the morning sun were getting closer and closer. The next moment, the sun shone on the ghost palanquin, and the heavenly fire descended. The moment the ghost palanquin rushed into the misty forest, flames ignited on Ning Chen's body, and he felt pain beyond his endurance. With a muffled groan, the surrounding blood energy was quickly consumed. The misty forest was strange and difficult to travel through. The ghost palanquin drove along a strange path, passing through layers of fog, and quickly rushed into another world. In the underworld, Ning Chen's body lit up with silver light, suppressing the heavenly fire. He leaned against the rock wall, panting heavily. The dark and quiet underworld was just as silent as ever. Two powerful auras emanated from the depths of the underworld, sending waves after waves of oppressive might that struck fear into the hearts of all who saw it. Ning Chun poured out a handful of pills, stuffed them into his mouth, and closed his eyes to catch his breath. The ghost girl's seclusion this time was longer than he expected. It could be seen how difficult it was to break through to the Xiantian realm. If the ghost girl was here, she could help him suppress the spread of the netherworld poison. But now, he could only rely on himself. He didn't know how effective the spider lily would be, but even if it could cure the poison, he didn't dare to do so. His current life depended on the spider lily. Once the poison was cured, he wouldn't be able to live. Half an hour later, Ning Chun brought the spider lily to another stone room. After closing the door, he didn't come out. Time passed day after day, and the war between Great Xia and Northern Meng was about to reach its final moments. The Northern Meng army heading south was not far from Great Xia's imperial city. In the imperial palace, Xia Mingri had already sent countless dark dragon guards to the misty forest. However, no matter how many people came, there was no news. One could enter the misty forest but not leave. This was the lesson learned for thousands of years, and the dark dragon guards were no exception. Great Xia was in a precarious situation. Compared to the lack of military strength, what was more serious was the fear of the people. More and more people believed that Great Xia would be defeated in this war. The Eternal Night cult in the west regrouped. Martial Monarch's injuries were mostly healed, and he led the cult's heavy cavalry to the east, fiercely clashing with Marquis Triumphant Return's Black Water Army. Everyone knew that whether the world's situation would change or not would be revealed soon. However, right at this moment, something unexpected happened to the Northern Ming army. While they were on their way, Fan Lingyue suddenly fell off his horse and fainted. The sudden attack caused the Northern Ming army to panic, and they did not know what to do. Fortunately, when the sun set, Fan Lingyue woke up and reappeared in front of the soldiers, stabilizing their morale. However, from this day onwards, whenever Fan Lingyue went out, he would spend most of his time in a wheelchair, and the number of times he coughed up blood also increased. Fan Lingyue also knew that he didn't have much time left, so he increased the speed of his army heading south again and again, doing everything he could to take down this powerful empire while he was still alive. The dark clouds of war grew increasingly gloomy. The soldiers that could be mobilized within Great Xia had already rushed to the north to assist. However, under the hooves of the Beiming Iron Cavalry, they quickly fell apart. Fan Lingyue's prestige had reached an unprecedented height. Apart from Great Xia, everyone wanted to see if the Beiming advisor could create such a miracle. When the invasion became popular, right and wrong no longer seemed important. Great Xia had been invincible for 1,000 years, bringing despair to the world. The situation of people coming from all directions might end soon. In the academy, the dean did not move, and neither did the teacher. It was as if they had never cared about this war. In the Confucian sect's Dragon Garden, Xia Mingri personally came and demanded the 4 palaces of the Confucian sect to send out Confucian experts to serve the empire. The coldness of the emperor was gradually revealed. The 4 palaces of the Confucian sect made him fearful, and he had no choice but to send out 3,000 Confucian disciples to serve the imperial court. The only good news for Great Xia was that the 100,000 reinforcements of the barbarian dynasty were not far from the battlefield in the north. After nearly 2 months of trekking, after the defeat of Duke Jingwu and Marquis Bloodrobed, there were less than 70,000 of them left. Apart from the Divine Wind Battalion, which was still intact, the other battalions only existed in name. In Ascension Valley, the atmosphere was getting more and more oppressive. The innate experts who had been in deep slumber were waking up day by day. In order to urge the Realm Master to return to the world, they did not hesitate to consume their remaining lifespan. If there were people from hundreds of years ago here, they would definitely recognize these old monsters who had one foot in the grave. These were all experts of the human world who had disappeared for no reason. Legend had it that some people had passed away, while others had disappeared. Unexpectedly, they were all here. Human nature was so ugly in the face of life and death. The longer one lived, the more they feared death. When faced with the temptation of immortality, they chose to betray without hesitation. The boundary between realms was not so easy to break. In this world, only experts of the 3 disasters realm had the ability to do so. Moreover, it had to be done at the weakest point of the boundary between realms. In Ascension Valley, there was such a place. However, the number of experts of the 3 disasters realm in the Divine Continent could be counted on one hand. Apart from the expert of the 3 disasters realm from the Eternal Night sect, who had never appeared, and the Buddha, who had disappeared after being defeated by Ning Chen, the remaining experts were even fewer. The purpose of Ascension Valley was to occupy the entire Divine Continent, and Great Xia was their primary target. In this way, it was undoubtedly impossible to get Dean Tian Song to help them. The greatest hope of Ascension Valley was only 2 people: the State Preceptor Beiming and the Eternal Night Martial Monarch. The State Preceptor Beiming's whereabouts were erratic. In the world, only Fan Lingyue knew about it. However, no one expected Fan Lingyue's attitude to be so unyielding. She used fierce and overbearing methods to kill one and injure the other of the 2 Xiantian emissaries of Ascension Valley. After that, the red-clothed woman also went to invite the martial monarch, but in the end, she also failed. The result was just as Fan Lingyue said. As long as she was still alive, the Eternal Night sect would not dare to agree to this. Seeing that the boundary was about to be broken, but they could not invite the expert of the 3 disasters realm. In the depths of Ascension Valley, terrifying auras were furious. They had waited for hundreds of years for this opportunity. As long as one expert of the three disasters realm cooperated with them, they would have the ability to break the boundary of this realm. It was extremely difficult for a second expert of the same realm to appear. They could not afford to wait. Go and kill that military preceptor Beimeng. If 2 people are not enough, send 3 or 4. As long as the realm master descends, the immortality you all want will immediately be realized. Yes. On this day, 4 innate experts left Ascension Valley and rushed in the direction of the Beimeng army. In the current situation, as long as they could kill the military preceptor Beimeng, the Eternal Night sect would have no choice but to cooperate with Ascension Valley due to the pressure from Wuxia. At that time, the appearance of the realm master would be unstoppable. In the underworld, Ningchen sat in a stone room, stuffing elixirs into his mouth. The elixir did not have much effect on the Yellow Springs flower, but it could alleviate the intense pain caused by circulating his vital qi. Ningchen forcefully activated the luck scroll and continued to cultivate without caring about anything else. Accompanied by the pain and lingering blood mist, the strong Ningchen almost went berserk because of the pain and distraction. Fortunately, with the help of a large number of elixirs, he managed to hold on. Gradually, the poison of the Yellow Springs flower began to erupt frequently. Every time this happened, Ningchen would swallow a petal of the red spider lily to suppress the poison of the Yellow Springs flower. The red spider lily and the Yellow Springs flower were mutually reinforcing and restraining each other. Under the effect of the red spider lily, the poison of the Yellow Springs flower, which had always been invincible, began to gradually dissipate. While Ningchen was surprised, he became even more careful about consuming the red spider lily. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would try his best not to consume it. The poison of the Yellow Springs flower in his body could not be cured, unless he did not want to live anymore. After cultivating again, Ningchen tried to break through to the innate realm again. When he used that sword in the chaotic sea of fog, he seemed to have touched that barrier. However, when he thought about it carefully, he felt that something was missing. Mubai's sword was always able to cross the gap between the innate realm and the acquired realm. It was unstoppable, as if it was never restricted by this barrier. What made him even more confused was that when Mubai used that sword to cut through the endless sea of fog, he did not use too much power. In the quiet underworld, the 3 of them were all in seclusion. Their auras were constantly fluctuating, and even the water in the distance began to sway. As time passed in the underworld, the 3rd aura became more and more powerful. The sword intent dispersed in all directions, drawing out streaks of sharp marks between the heaven and earth. The ownerless sword intent caused the Jiga sword to resonate. Rings of sword aura spread out, and similarly affected the figures in seclusion in the stone room. The 2 strongest swordsmen in the world, Mu Bai and King Yan, one verified the sword, and the other listened to the sword. They used the same sword but had different paths. At this moment, they were competing in different ways, which greatly benefited Ningchen in the stone room. At the same time, in the Divine Continent, 4 innate realm experts were rushing towards the Northern Meng army. In the Tiansong Academy, the dean looked at the figures flashing across the horizon. He hesitated for a long time, but still did not make a move. He admitted that he was selfish. Subconsciously, he still did not want to see the great Xia perish. The military advisor of the Northern Meng was too powerful. In a small courtyard in the academy, the teacher sighed in disappointment. You should have made a move. The teacher's voice traveled across space. The dean was silent for a moment, and then said slowly, I'm sorry to disappoint you. The teacher did not say anything else. His old eyes looked in the direction of the Ascension Valley, and a light flashed in them. The change of dynasties was unavoidable since ancient times. For the people of the Divine Continent, there was not much difference who was the master. However, this was on the premise that the Divine Continent was still the master, and not enslaved by other realms. That junior of the Northern Meng, although his methods were a little fierce when he attacked the Great Xia, his treatment of the Ascension Valley had indeed made him look at him in a new light. At such a young age, he had such foresight. It was indeed rare in the world. In the Northern Ming camp, In the commander's tent, Fan Lingyue coughed violently again and again. Blood overflowed from the corners of his mouth, and there was no trace of blood on his pale face. Under the light, he looked so weak. At this moment, waves of extremely powerful forces rapidly approached from afar. They were vast and majestic and shook one's mind. Fan Lingyue's expression changed slightly. He sat in a wheelchair and walked out of the commander's tent. Looking at the four figures coming from afar, a trace of coldness flashed across his beautiful face. Chapter 206. The auras of the four Xiantian experts combined to form an absolute suppression. Even hundreds of miles away, the northern Ming soldiers felt a stifling pressure that made it hard to breathe. Fan Lingyue got up and waved his hand. Jingye Taichu flew in front of him. His sword was still in its scabbard, but it was already trembling. Military advisor Xiao Wanhua, Qing Wuyo, and the others hurried forward worriedly. Retreat. These people aren't people you can deal with, said Fan Lingyue coldly. Xiao Wanhua, Qing Wuyo, and the others didn't dare to go against the order. Under the lonely night, Fan Lingyue stood alone in front of the camp, waiting for the enemy to quickly approach. The night wind blew, and her blue dress fluttered in the wind. Her hair was like a waterfall floating in the wind. No one could predict the future battle. The soldiers of Northern Meng still trusted their military advisor wholeheartedly. Even if the sky fell, they would not be shaken. Only Xiao Wanhua, whose strength was closest to Xiantian, was worried. The difference between Xiantian and Hotian was unimaginable. No matter how strong the military advisor was, he couldn't deal with four Xiantian experts at the same time. The four arrived in the blink of an eye, 2 men and 2 women. They didn't look old, but their real ages were frighteningly old. Ancestor. Xiao Wanhua was startled when he saw one of the men. Was he mistaken? The person in front of him was actually the Xiao family's ancestor, that he had been fortunate enough to see when he was young. Even after 30 years, he still vaguely remembered the ancestor's appearance. It was exactly the same as the person in front of him. Someone from the Xiao family? What a coincidence, said Xiao Pejuan indifferently as he looked over. Do you have any descendants? Don't be soft-hearted because of this, said the red-clothed woman coldly. Of course. Xiao Pejuan nodded. Fan Lingyue, I'll give you one last chance. As long as you cooperate with Ascension Valley, we'll immediately help you take down Grand Xia. Otherwise, this day next year will be your death anniversary, warned a blue-clothed middle-aged man. It's still the same. Whether we take down Grand Xia or not is my business. Ascension Valley doesn't have the right to decide the future of the divine continent, said Fan Lingyue coldly. Xiao Wanhua stepped forward and anxiously asked, Ancestor, how can you help Ascension Valley deal with the military advisor? Impudent. Xiao Pejuan's eyes turned cold, and his aura instantly pushed Xiao Wanhua back dozens of meters. I've long heard of the Xiao clan's defeated army. Now that I've met you today, I'm disappointed, Fan Lingyue said calmly. No matter how eloquent you are, you won't be able to live past tonight. The famous military advisor of Beiming is nothing more than this. You don't know how to adapt to the situation. You're not worthy of being called the wisest person in the world, the last yellow-clothed woman said sarcastically. There's no point in talking. Come. As soon as he finished speaking, Fan Lingyue took a step forward. Instantly, white light rose up, illuminating the mortal world. Be careful. There's something strange about this white light. It's impervious to all techniques, and it can also consume your true qi. It's very difficult to deal with, the red-clothed woman warned. Are you scared? You're only at the peak of the Hotian realm. How strong can you be? Sneered the yellow-clothed woman. Granny Yen, if you want to die, no one will stop you. The woman in red coldly snorted. Stop arguing. If we can't complete this mission, it won't do anyone any good. The blue-clothed middle-aged man stepped forward and sent out a palm. His vast true qi stirred up the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, crashing down. Fan Lingyue slashed out with his sword. White light shone, and his true qi instantly disappeared. The blue-clothed middle-aged man was startled. His body twisted in the air, and he retreated dozens of meters. At the same time, Xiao Pejuan's saber slashed down. It was incomparably domineering. Kata saber. Fan Lingyue narrowed his eyes. He didn't dodge, and his slender hand grabbed the edge of the Kata saber. The ancient overlord Raha's saber had the ability to cut through the heavens. He hadn't expected it to be in Xiao Pejuan's hands. White light spread out from the Kata saber like moonlight. Xiao Pejuan felt his true qi quickly leak out. Sword in palm, the red-clothed woman rushed forward and activated her palm energy, trying to rescue Wei from Zhao. Fan Lingyue let go of the Kata saber and leaned to the side. His sword slashed out, creating a brilliant killing light. The red-clothed woman retreated quickly, unwilling to come into contact with the saber. In the blink of an eye, the three of them had already attacked for a round. The three innate masters joined forces, but they couldn't gain the upper hand. The yellow-clothed woman was shocked. How could a peak postnatal master be so strong? Attack together, or no one will be able to return tonight. The red-clothed woman warned again. This time, the yellow-clothed woman didn't refute. She clenched her right hand, and a sharp ancient sword appeared. The sword was cold and piercing. The four of them surrounded and attacked together. Their powerful aura covered the sky and earth, suppressing everything. The battle of the 5 strongest cultivators was 4 against 1. In front of the northern Meng army, everything collapsed, and the earth was devastated. The white light around Fan Lingyue rose to the extreme, raising his combat power to the extreme. White light covered the heaven and earth. Blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth, dripping on his blue dress. Fan Lingyue's body couldn't bear the full release of his strength for a long time, and he started to show signs of exhaustion. In the Tiansong Academy, the teacher turned into the noble Confucian Qi and opened the sky-expanding plate. Everything in the void rotated, revealing the secrets of heaven and earth. After a long time, the teacher stopped. He looked in the direction of the distant misty forest and said, "Ning Chun, come to the academy immediately." In the netherworld, Ning Chun, who had been in seclusion for a long time, suddenly opened his eyes. The sword will around him retracted, and he stood up and disappeared in a flash. The next moment, the ghost sedan sped towards the academy. In less than an hour, the ghost sedan arrived at the academy. Ning Chun got off the sedan, and his figure flashed past, arriving at the teacher's courtyard. "Teacher." Ning Chun bowed respectfully and greeted. "There's one thing I want to tell you," the teacher said slowly. "Teacher, please speak." Ning Chun said respectfully. The teacher briefly told him about the Ascension Valley. After that, he said calmly, "You decide what to do." Ning Chun didn't say anything. He summoned the ghost sedan and quickly went north. The teacher nodded, and a touch of relief flashed through his old eyes. These 2 young juniors were much more clear-headed than most people in the world. Not far away, the dean was silent. He didn't expect his tolerance to be worse than a young man. He really couldn't help the military advisor of Northern Meng. Although he had entered the 3 disasters, he still couldn't ignore the rise and fall of Great Xia. He hoped that the Master of Divine Prefecture would be Great Xia, not Northern Meng. The ghost sedan sped up. In the sedan, Ning Chun took out the red spider lily, bit off a petal and swallowed it. The battle later would definitely be extremely tragic. If the poison broke out at that time, he wouldn't even have the chance to take the red spider lily. He didn't expect that the first battle after coming out of seclusion would be to help Fan Lingyue. He wanted to give her a surprise, but now, Fan Lingyue gave him a surprise. In front of the Northern Meng army, the battle was getting more and more intense. Fan Lingyue, who was fighting with all her strength, was as brilliant as the moon in the sky, illuminating the whole world. 1 against 4. A battle that surpassed the innate stage and the acquired stage. The 4 were shocked. There was actually such a terrifying person in the world. However, no matter how strong Fan Lingyue was, facing the siege of 4 innate stage experts, she finally showed signs of fatigue. While she swung her sword to repel the attacks of 3 people, a palm strike came from behind. The white light couldn't dissipate in time, and the 3rd layer of the martial arts was activated. Blood dyed the sky. Military advisor, Qing Wuyo, Xiao Wanhua, and the other generals were shocked. They immediately went forward to help. "Back down!" Fan Lingyue shouted coldly and ordered. Qing Wuyo and the others paused. They didn't dare to disobey the military orders that had been accumulated for a long time. They retreated step by step. Fan Lingyue, you have won the respect of Xiao Pejuan. Next move, I will take your life. After saying that, Xiao Pejuan raised the Kata saber. The saber light soared into the sky, drawing a long bloody scar. The terrifying power shook the 9 heavens. Seeing this, the other 3 people raised their martial arts and coordinated their moves, wanting to end the life of the woman in front of them in one move. However, at this moment a black sword appeared. Xiao Pejuan, who was focused on his move, couldn't react in time. While dodging with all his strength, the sword still pierced through his right chest. What a pity! Ningchen pulled out the black sword. His figure flashed and appeared in front of Fan Lingyue. There was some regret on his face. He originally wanted to pierce through the heart in the left chest. The sudden change shocked everyone. Xiao Pejuan, who was injured by the black sword, immediately used his true qi to stop the bleeding. The other 3 also focused. Facing an unfamiliar expert who suddenly appeared, they didn't dare to be careless. It's you. Fan Lingyue coughed and spat out a mouthful of blood. Are you surprised? I also didn't think that there would be a day when we would work together. However, can you still fight? Ningchen asked calmly. Endless fighting spirit. Fan Lingyue wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said slowly, that's good. Tonight, there is no difference between Great Xia and Northern Meng. Let's clean up these traitors of the Divine Prefecture first. What I hate the most in my life are traitors. Ningchen looked at the 4 people in front of him and said with killing intent, what is a traitor? Fan Lingyue asked. The language of my hometown. You won't understand even if I tell you, Ningchen replied. Huh? Fan Lingyue smiled faintly and said, then you don't have to say it. However, can your body take it? Don't drag me down. This is also what I want to tell you, Ningchen replied and took a step forward. Sword intent appeared around him. A strange look flashed across Fan Lingyue's eyes. He was indeed different. Looks like you are about to step into the Xiantian realm too, Fan Lingyue said calmly as he released a white light. Just like you, I don't dare to take that step. Ningchen moved, and the black sword split open the sky. An unparalleled sword intent directly crossed the boundary between the Xiantian realm and the Hotian realm and swept toward Xiao Pejuan and the yellow-clothed woman. The 2 of them were shocked. The Kata saber and ancient edge cooperated and collided with the heaven-splitting sword. A shocking explosion sounded. The blood and qi in the 2 of them were affected by the terrifying sword intent and surged violently. A single sword against 2 edges. The moment the battle started, it was a matter of life and death. On the other side, with 2 less opponents, Fan Lingyue immediately felt the pressure on him decrease greatly. He released the absolute beginning of pure karma, and the white light was cold and dazzling. The red-clothed woman and the blue-clothed middle-aged man joined forces to fight, and the battle was also extremely intense. Yesterday's opponents, today's comrade in arms. Facing the invasion of the outer realm, the 2 of them temporarily put down their positions without reservation and fought with all their strength. Chapter 207, 2 against 4, Hotian against Xiantian. The originally unequal battle was forcibly narrowed by the 2 sharp swords. Sword against sword, palm against palm, silhouette against silhouette. The battlefield changed several times. The splattered blood dripped onto the ground, dyeing it red. The white light turned into the myriad laws of heaven and earth, blocking most of the attacks. Ningchen, with his sword in hand, had an unstoppable sword will. His attack was extremely terrifying, bearing most of the attacks. The most perfect cooperation, without any rehearsal. The 2 people who were the most familiar with each other in the world had demonstrated what trust and tacit understanding were tonight. Perhaps after this battle, the 2 of them would still be enemies, but at this moment, they were comrades in arms who had gone through life and death together. The 4 of them became more and more shocked as they fought. They couldn't break the white light, nor could they block the black sword. Suddenly Fan Lingyue couldn't take it anymore. He staggered and vomited blood, dyeing the blue clothes in front of him red. A flaw suddenly appeared in the white light, and the woman in red seized the opportunity. She stepped forward and sent a palm strike. The black sword in Ningchen's hand pushed away the 2 people in front of him. His figure flashed quickly, and his left hand turned over to meet the attack. There was a shocking explosion. Ning Chun took a few steps back, the corners of his mouth stained with ink. He waved his sword and slashed out again. The woman in red was blocked by the sword light. She could only temporarily dodge the attack. In a head-on clash of cultivation, Ning Chun was undoubtedly at a disadvantage and suffered heavy injuries. At this point in the battle, the 6 of them were all injured. Ning Chun had the immortal body, so he was fine for the time being. But Fan Lingyue's sick body couldn't hold on for long. Blood kept flowing from his mouth, and he could collapse at any time. No matter how brave the sword was, it couldn't withstand the attacks of 4 Xiantian experts. The fact that the 2 of them could fight to this extent had already surpassed the limit of heaven's reach. Can you still hold on? Ning Chun stood in front of Fan Lingyue and asked seriously. It's okay, I can still fight. Fan Lingyue struggled to stand firm and said slowly. It's good that you can hold on. I can't fight 4 people alone, Ning Chun said. Fan Lingyue suppressed his sick body. The white light spread out, once again enveloping a 10-meter radius. The 4 of them took turns to fight, 2 attacking and 2 defending. Ji Du and Gu Feng, with their Xiantian power, suppressed the enemy and shook the heaven and earth. Ning Chun focused 90% of his attention on offense and 10% on defense. His black sword was simple and unassuming, but it made the 4 of them feel a murderous aura that threatened their lives. In Fan Lingyue's hands, the pure night absolute beginning transformed into a continuous sword move. It was a soft and continuous move, white light lingering around it. The moment it came into contact with it, the opponent's true chi instantly dissipated. The 2 swords worked together to resist the strong enemy. One sword out, the other back, the head and the tail working together. There was no flaw to be found. In the distance, the northern Ming soldiers looked at the 6 figures crisscrossing each other on the battlefield. They were shocked beyond words. So a battle could be like this. The 2 sword wills were connected. They did not communicate with words, nor did they use their eyes to signal each other. They only relied on their hearts to make their moves. Both of them had entered the realm of sword breath. Their murderous aura was intimidating. Prince Yan once said that Ning Chun had too many things on his mind, and his sword heart was not calm. It was unlikely that he would be able to feel the breath of the sword in his entire life. Fan Lingyue was the same. The 2 of them were so similar, and had too many concerns. It was almost impossible for them to feel the sword aura. However, nothing was absolute. At the moment of life and death tonight, the 2 of them had no choice but to trust each other wholeheartedly. They trusted each other, and also trusted the swords in their hands. The 2 of them used the same sword aura. Feeling the other's sword, their own swords followed suit. 2 swords, 2 hearts, breathing and thinking at the same time. There was no difference anymore. Ji Du's blade slashed over, the white light dissipating most of the attack. Fan Lingyue's sword light met it. At the moment of collision, Ji Du's might was reduced by another 30%. The ink sword swept past. Xiao Pejuan withdrew his blade to block, but he felt a surge of sword will penetrate the blade and enter his body. With a bang, Xiao Pejuan flew out, his mouth dyed red again. How are you? The yellow-clothed woman's body flashed and she waved her hand to support him. I'm fine. Xiao Pejuan steadied himself and wiped off the blood on his face. His expression was cold. The 4 of them attacked again. The pure night absolute beginning grabbed a gentle sword force. His true chi poured out from his palms and on the blade. Ning Chun arrived at the same time. The ink sword landed, and the sword moved at will, slashing out a brilliant light. The yellow-clothed woman took the sword head-on. The sword flashed with cold light, once again pressing towards her life. Fan Lingyue's left hand flickered with light. With a clang, the ancient sword was pushed away. Immediately after, his palm struck out towards the attacking red-clothed woman. Closely pressed, without any time to breathe, Ji Du soared through the sky, shaking the heavens and earth. At this moment, Fan Lingyue's palm shifted. Ignoring the attacking woman, he turned his palm to block the blade light. The ground beneath his feet instantly cracked. The red-clothed woman pressed forward. Her ink sword appeared at the same time. Snowflakes drifted down. One sword opened 100 feet in the sky. The red-clothed woman flew out. Her body was greatly shaken, blood splattering across the horizon. The night wind blew past. The smell of blood spread everywhere. The bloody night was peerlessly shocking. The four Xiantian experts fought in a sorry state. They fought in humiliation. They once looked down on the world, but today, they were forced into a corner by two juniors. Don't drag it out anymore. Let's end this quickly, the blue-clothed man said coldly. The other three nodded. Their true chi rose rapidly. They used their extreme techniques, wanting to forcefully break apart the two's cooperation. A terrifying pressure spread out. The ground cracked. Large pieces of debris rose up, and then fell down with a bang. The strength of the Xiantian experts was fully displayed at this moment. The northern Ming soldiers who were slightly closer were unable to retreat in time. They were directly shattered into pieces by this terrifying power. At this critical moment, Fan Lingyue turned his palm. White light soared into the sky. The scroll of moon technique appeared in the world again. At the same time, Ning Chen's body flashed and appeared behind the former. His sword finger condensed frost. He used the scroll of life and poured his true chi into the latter's body. Scroll of moon, silent moonfall. Fan Lingyue condensed the two's techniques. The scroll of moon was pushed to the extreme. The divine moon shone and white light quickly spread out. The heavenly technique appeared in the world. In an instant, moonlight descended and the world was silent. It was as if the world had frozen. The four figures suddenly stopped moving. Ning Chen and Fan Lingyue rushed out. Their swords slashed across and the yellow-clothed woman's throat. The powerful sword intent destroyed the woman's life force. It chased after her soul and took her life. On the other side, Fan Lingyue swung his sword to kill Xiao Pejuan. However, he didn't expect Xiao Pejuan to break free at the last moment and meet him with his sword. With a loud bang, the two retreated more than 10 steps. Their bodies were dyed red. Retreat! The blue-clothed middle-aged man, who came back to his senses, saw that the situation was not right and ordered a retreat. Xiao Pejuan and the red-clothed woman retreated without hesitation. They disappeared into the night in the blink of an eye. After the three retreated, Fan Lingyue staggered and vomited a mouthful of blood, which spilled on the yellow soil. Ning Chen withdrew his sword and looked at the woman in front of him with a complicated expression. The feeling of the sword aura dissipated in the blink of an eye. At this moment he couldn't feel it at all. The enemy retreated. The two were still enemies and not friends. Killing intent overflowed, and the atmosphere became extremely strange. Qing Wuyo and the others who had just breathed a sigh of relief immediately became alert again. They were ready to help at any time. In the end, the two didn't make a move. Now, neither of them had the confidence to kill the other. Moreover, the Ascension Valley was about to appear. This made the two more apprehensive. Fan Lingyue retreat, Ning Chen advised again. Impossible. Fan Lingyue refused without hesitation. There was no room for negotiation. Ning Chen sighed softly. He knew the answer would be like this, but he still couldn't calm down and asked again. How do you plan to deal with the Ascension Valley? Ning Chen changed the topic. They need the help of 3 calamities. The Martial Lord is the only candidate. However, as long as I'm alive, the Eternal Night cult won't have the guts, Fan Lingyue said coldly. How long can you last? 1 month? 2 months? Why are you so stubborn? Ning Chen sighed. There's no need to say more. What you should do now is to pray that the Great Xia can last these 2 months. As for the Ascension Valley, I have my own plans, Fan Lingyue said calmly. Marquis Xiao, send the guest off. Yes. Xiao Wanhua walked forward and politely bowed. Jiming Marquis, please. Ning Chen sighed inwardly. He waved his hand to summon the ghost palanquin and walked in. Fan Lingyue, I will definitely do my best to stop you. The final words echoed in front of the Beiming formation. The ghost palanquin quickly left and soon disappeared. I hope you have the ability to do so. Fan Lingyue turned around and returned to her tent, leaving behind a land riddled with holes. Dust rose in the night wind and didn't settle for a long time. In the Netherworld Palace, Ning Chen looked at the stone room sealed by layers of restrictions. A lonely light flashed through his eyes. He might not be able to wait for her to recover her memories. Before the Xiantian realm, Fan Lingyue hadn't taken the final step, and neither had he. It wasn't that he couldn't, but that he didn't dare. If he took this step he would die. Or perhaps, Fan Lingyue was still half a step away. Because she had the Chaos Scroll, she could take that extra step. Just now, in the moment of one heart and breath, he saw the Chaos Scroll and that surging and vast true chi. A martial artist's realm couldn't be suppressed for a long time. However, the Chaos Scroll could conceal heaven's secrets. So Fan Lingyue was able to forcibly suppress her realm. In the past he was very far away from the Xiantian realm. He always thought that there would be a day when he could break through. Now he was so close. But he didn't dare to take that step. This step wasn't as easy as he imagined. The danger within it could only be felt when it was within reach. Only now did he understand why Fan Lingyue had never taken this step. With the killing karma she had created, and the endurance of her body, as long as she took that step, she would definitely die. Now that it was his turn to make the decision, he couldn't take that step either. 300 miles away from the imperial city of Great Xia, the light cavalry of Great Xia, who had been training in camp, left their camp and headed north, making their final effort for this war. The leader of the army was Xia Zi. This prince of Great Xia who came from the Confucian sect had finally abandoned his benevolence. He put on his battle armor and headed north. When the night fell, Ningchen came. After a long time, the two of them met again. The 30,000 light cavalry carried the heavy responsibility of eliminating the northern Meng heavy cavalry. They had endured for a long time, all for this upcoming battle. This was the final moment of Great Xia's counterattack. They couldn't afford to fail. Are we not waiting for the barbarian dynasty's reinforcements? Xia Zi asked solemnly. No. Ningchen shook his head and continued. We can't afford to lose this battle. After all, the barbarian dynasty's reinforcements aren't under the command of Great Xia. Once there's a disagreement, our preparations will go to waste. Xia Zi nodded. The war of Great Xia ultimately depended on Great Xia itself. This was the most crucial battle. No matter what, they had to win. Chapter 208. The 30,000 cavalrymen heading north hurried through the night. They had already set off 2 days earlier to make ample preparations for this war. Of the 30,000 cavalrymen, about 5,000 of them wore armor that was different from the others. It wasn't as heavy as the northern Meng heavy cavalry, but it was heavier than the light cavalry. These were the heavy cavalry of Great Xia. Although there weren't many of them, they had a very important battle strategy. When the 30,000 cavalrymen headed north, the 70,000 imperial guards under Duke Jingwu also headed south. The two armies chased after each other, surrounding the northern Meng army. 4 days later, the Great Xia imperial guards finally caught up to the northern Meng army. The two armies were so close that the battle could erupt at any moment. The atmosphere of war shrouded the two armies as Great Xia attacked from both sides, forcing the northern Meng army to deal with it. In the northern Meng camp, Fan Lingyue was sitting in the commander's tent, looking at the reports sent by his scouts. Great Xia lacked horses, so cavalry wasn't their main force. Their combat strength was much weaker than the northern Meng cavalry. In a direct confrontation, 10,000 northern Meng cavalry was enough to deal with 20,000 Great Xia cavalry. Now the 70,000 imperial guards behind the northern Meng army posed a greater threat. The Divine Wind Battalion was still intact, and their combat strength couldn't be underestimated. Military advisor, the commander of the Great Xia cavalry is Xia Zi. His talent isn't inferior to anyone else, and he can step into the Xiantian realm at any time. We have to be careful, Xiao Wanhua said. You deal with him. I'll deal with Duke Jingwu personally, Fan Lingyue said calmly. Yes, Xiao Wanhua said respectfully. In King Haowu's camp, Xia Zi walked out of the commander's tent and looked at the northern Meng army in the distance with a grave expression. Now, Ningchen had to think of a way to separate the northern Meng cavalry from the other 60,000 cavalrymen. The Great Xia cavalry wasn't a match for the northern Meng cavalry in a direct confrontation. In the Imperial Guard camp, Duke Jingwu, Marquis Bloodclad, and Ningchen had been discussing in the tent for most of the night. Ningchen only left when the sky was about to brighten. Beat the drums attack. Once the sky brightened, The 30,000 Imperial Guards of the Divine Wind Battalion advanced in formation, with the remaining 40,000 following closely behind, ready to reinforce at any time. Marquis Blood-clad Marquis, and the 3 commanders of the Divine Wind Battalion, took the lead in fighting against Qing Wuyo and several generals of northern Meng. Marquis Blood-robed's battle prowess was unparalleled, suppressing everyone. The 4 swords fought, focusing on defense, barely holding back the martial Marquis of Xia. The elites of the Divine Wind Battalion were all sent out. On the contrary, Bei Meng was more conservative. 8,000 heavy cavalry soldiers just watched and did not participate in the battle. On the first day of probing, both armies suffered casualties. However, the casualties were not large. When the sun set, both armies retreated and peace was restored. When night fell, the Great Xia cavalry on the other side suddenly attacked the camp of the Bei Meng heavy cavalry. Xiao Wanhua reacted quickly and immediately sent light cavalry and infantry to meet the enemy head-on, covering the heavy cavalry that had already taken off their armor. The Great Xia cavalry attacked for a wave, and after seeing that they did not gain anything, they immediately retreated. Ning Chen stood in the distance and looked at the retreating Great Xia cavalry. His expression was calm, and he didn't look disappointed. Not gaining anything tonight was a normal situation. With Fan Lingyue's intellect, how would he not be wary of Great Xia sneak attacks? The advantage of heavy cavalry was that they could forcefully break through formations. In a head-on clash, they were invincible. However, they also had their own weaknesses. One of them was that the heavy armor could not be worn by the soldiers and the war horses. If not, both the soldiers and the war horses would not be able to take it. Wearing the armor before the battle and taking it off after the battle was an essential part of the heavy cavalry. However, the armor of the heavy cavalry was abnormally heavy and complicated to wear. Every time they wore the armor, they had to spend a lot of time taking it off. It was impossible for them to get on their horses and fight at any time like the light cavalry. Hence, when they were not fighting, the heavy cavalry would not be of any use. As for the other weaknesses of the heavy cavalry, it would depend on whether the Bei Meng heavy cavalry would make mistakes in the following battle. Xia Zi walked over and said, "Let's go." Ning Chen nodded and left with the former. On the second day, the Divine Wind Battalion and the remaining 40,000 guards continued to attack. On the other side, 30,000 Great Xia cavalry were waiting to tie down the enemy. Fan Lingyue sat at the front of the formation and commanded the army to fight. As for the Great Xia cavalry, they temporarily gave full power to Xiao Wanhua. On this day, the heavy cavalry struck out and clashed with the Divine Wind Battalion. The two sides clashed head-on, and both sides suffered casualties. The heavy cavalry lost 400 cavalry, and the Divine Wind Battalion lost 2,000 soldiers. On the other side, without the threat of the heavy cavalry, the 5,000 heavy cavalry of Great Xia were fearless. They carried their specially made spears and attacked several times, causing the Bei Meng cavalry to be in a bad state. Although the Great Xia heavy cavalry was not as strong as the Bei Meng heavy cavalry, they still had a huge advantage against the Bei Meng light cavalry. At night, the Great Xia light cavalry attacked once more. Their target was still the camp of the Bei Meng heavy cavalry. After meeting resistance, they immediately retreated without hesitation. On the third day, the same situation happened once more. As long as the Bei Meng heavy cavalry went to deal with the Divine Wind Battalion, the Great Xia heavy cavalry would appear and disrupt the situation. Helplessly, Xiao Wanhua could only send someone to ask Fan Lingyue to temporarily move the heavy cavalry to deal with the 30,000 cavalry of Great Xia. After Fan Lingyue received the report, he agreed and moved the heavy cavalry over. However, he ordered that no matter what the situation was, the heavy cavalry could not move alone and had to be covered by the light cavalry. In the next 2 days, the attacks of the Great Xia guards came wave after wave, never stopping. On the other side, after the Bei Meng heavy cavalry moved over, the Great Xia cavalry calmed down a lot. However, the attack at night was still the same and did not stop for a single night. The Bei Meng heavy cavalry was annoyed. Sometimes, just as they took off their heavy armor, the Great Xia light cavalry would sneak up on them. They had no choice but to put it back on. Just as they were about to fight, the Great Xia cavalry would quickly retreat. During wartime, the situation could change in an instant. Fan Lingyue knew the importance of improvising, so she placed all her attention on the Great Xia guards. On the other side, the Great Xia cavalry was relatively weak, and she believed that Xiao Wanhua could temporarily deal with them. This time, the surprise that she gave Great Xia had arrived in time. On the night of the 6th day, a figure covered in black cloth appeared in the Beiming commander tent. Fan Lingyue sat on a wheelchair, and a cold smile appeared on his face. "Abbot, how have you been?" "Ba." With a loud Buddhist chant, the black cloth suddenly exploded, revealing the Buddha who had disappeared for a long time, the abbot of Dui Temple. On the other side of the Beiming army, in King Haowu's camp, 3,000 Confucian disciples appeared at the same time. This was the first time Ning Chun saw a Confucian abbot, and his first impression was very ordinary. Or rather, his impression of the entire Confucian sect was very ordinary. He respected his teacher, but that did not mean he had a good impression of the Confucian sect. The current Confucian sect had long forgotten the original reason why his teacher had founded it. His teacher had founded it to educate the people, not to let them rely on it to fight for power. The Confucians in the imperial court had done a lot for him to be cursed. He did not respond, because he did not have the energy to deal with them. Xia Zi also knew that Ning Chun did not like the Confucian sect, so he wanted to ease the relationship between Ning Chun and the Confucian sect. "Ning Chun, this is the abbot's abbot. Your sword is cultivated by the abbot." "Many thanks." Ning Chun cupped his fists and bowed, maintaining a polite appearance. "I've long since heard of the Jiming Marquis' name. Now that I've met you, you truly are a young hero," said the abbot politely. "You praise me too much." Ning Chun did not say anything else. This abbot clearly was not a simple person. Things were different now, and he no longer had the energy to feign civility. Xia Zi sighed inside, knowing that he could not force him. He brought the abbot out of the tent and arranged a place for him to rest. Jiming Marquis, a few days ago, Prince Yan and a girl called Wild came to the Confucian sect. "That girl seemed to be looking for you," said the abbot as he was about to leave. Ning Chun trembled, his heart no longer calm. Why had that silly girl run out again? If his senior knew that he was in the underworld, then Wild should also know. Why hadn't Wild come? Ning Chun's mind was filled with countless thoughts. The more he thought about it, the more he didn't understand. From ancient times until now, a woman's thoughts were not something a man could guess. No matter how smart a man was, no matter how simple a woman was. Far away in the wilderness, two figures were slowly moving forward, one in front and one behind. The woman in the back was wearing a beautiful dress, carrying an ancient sword rack on her back. On the rack, there were 4 swords, 3 of which belonged to her seniors, and 1 of which belonged to her. "Senior, let's rest for a bit," said Wild. She was unable to walk any further. "All right." Prince Yin responded softly, and stopped in his tracks. Wild was not a spoiled brat. She found a rock and sat down. She took out 2 pears from her bag, and gave one to her senior while eating the other. Prince Yin smiled and took the pear. He softly said, "Wild, do you want to learn the sword?" "I don't want to." Wild took a bite of the pear and straightforwardly replied. "Haha." Prince Yin chuckled. Those who wanted to teach didn't want to learn, and those who wanted to learn couldn't learn. If Ning Chun had half of this girl's power of understanding, he would have entered the innate stage long ago. "Senior, where are we going?" asked Wild. "The Far East," Prince Yin replied. "Why are we going there?" asked Wild curiously. "Tribulation transcendence," said Prince Yin calmly. After transcending the last tribulation at the 5th tribulation realm, one would trigger the taboo of the 3 calamities at any time. If the first calamity appeared, it might implicate the innocent. He didn't want to take the risk. In this world, there were only 5 people who had reached the 3 calamities realm. However, every one of them had brought about considerable calamities to the world after transcending the first calamity. The strength of the 3 calamities realm was built on the sacrifice of the innocent. Wild wasn't interested in cultivation. She chewed on her pear, and thought about what a certain person was doing now. "Senior, I miss him," whispered Wild softly as she felt depressed for no reason. Prince Yin sighed inwardly and said softly, "When we return from the Far East, I'll bring you to find him, all right?" "All right." Wild nodded obediently. A beautiful smile bloomed on her pretty face like a blooming flower. It was so beautiful that it was intoxicating. Chapter 209. At dawn, before the sky was completely bright, the Beiming heavy cavalry were woken up by the sound of galloping horse hooves. Attacking twice in one night, the heavy cavalry soldiers could not suppress their anger. Great Xia's actions were really despicable. Beiming was prepared, and their infantry and light cavalry quickly got into formation to defend against the Great Xia cavalry. Such a scene had happened many times, and Beiming was used to defending against the Great Xia cavalry. They did not dare to be careless at all. However, this time, the Beiming army realized that Great Xia did not send the light cavalry. Instead, they were fully equipped heavy cavalry. The moment both sides clashed, the Beiming army that was not prepared fell into a passive state. After the Great Xia heavy cavalry, the light cavalry followed closely behind, charging wave after wave at the Beiming defensive line. The battle was abnormally intense, and the Beiming army quickly gathered up to deal with the attacks of the Great Xia cavalry. On the other side, the Great Xia Guards Legion Corps also launched their attacks. The Divine Wind unit attacked at all costs, trying their best to delay the Beiming cavalry. On the two battlefields, the four commanders all had different thoughts as they calmly looked on at the cruelty of the battle. The Beiming army was split into two, and they faced the attacks of Great Xia on different battlefields. This battle quickly reached its climax in the morning. An hour later, the Beiming heavy cavalry finished their preparations and got into formation. Qing Wuyo held his halberd and stood in front of the formation. He raised his halberd and gave the order to charge out. The rumbling of molten iron flood was unstoppable, and the Great Xia cavalry could not block it. Not long later, they were at a disadvantage. Retreat! Under Xia Zi's order, the Great Xia light cavalry quickly retreated, and the heavy cavalry followed closely behind in an orderly fashion. The Beiming heavy cavalry followed closely behind, venting their anger. Anyone who was disturbed day and night would find it hard to remain calm. Xiao Wanhua observed the situation, and a cold glow flashed in his eyes. With all the Great Xia cavalry out, there would be no more ambushes. Today was a chance. Great Xia's distraction tactic was hard to defend against, and he could not passively defend. If not, once Great Xia succeeded, it would be too late to regret it. In a head-on clash, the combat strength of the Beiming heavy cavalry was invincible. He wanted to make use of this chance to crush all of Great Xia's resistance. Chase! With a single order, the Northern Ming heavy cavalry charged out in full force, their armor clanging as they chased after them. The fish has finally taken the bait. After they were far away from Northern Ming's camp, Xia Zi waved his hand and ordered the light cavalry to spread out. The heavy cavalry faced the heavy cavalry and prepared for a decisive battle. The mocking look in Qing Wuyo's eyes was extremely clear. The heavy cavalry of Great Xia could deal with normal light cavalry, but going head-to-head with the heavy cavalry of Beiming was like hitting a rock with an egg. Behind them, Beiming's 10,000 light cavalry were on standby, ready to reap the rewards of the battle. Xiao Wanhua remembered Fan Lingyue's order, and did not let the heavy cavalry attack alone, sending light cavalry to cover them at all times. The battle between the two armies was about to break out at any moment. Beiming's heavy cavalry swiftly charged forward, followed by the 10,000 light cavalry as cover. Retreat! The battle went on for an hour, and Great Xia was once again at a disadvantage. Xia Zi came down, and the Great Xia cavalry retreated once again. Just like that, the Great Xia cavalry fought as they retreated, moving the Beiming heavy cavalry and 10,000 light cavalry far away from the Beiming camp. Xiao Wanhua gradually felt that something was amiss. At this moment, a scout rushed over from the distance and quickly reporting to the Marquis, "Someone is attacking the camp." Luring the tiger away from the mountain, Xiao Wanhua's face turned cold, and he said coldly, "How many?" "Around 5,000 cavalry," the scout replied. Retreat. Xiao Wanhua observed the situation and ordered. The Beiming army received the order and swiftly retreated like a flood. The back of the formation was the front of the formation. The light cavalry were faster, and they were led by Xiao Wanhua to reinforce the camp. In front of the great Xia cavalry formation, Xia Zi acted at the same time and said, Chase! The order was sent out, and the light cavalry that were spread out went around to stop the Beiming heavy cavalry from coming back. In the distance, the Beiming camp was ablaze, and one could see the eye-catching flames from far away. Time was of the essence, and Xiao Wanhua made the decision to order the personal guards beside him. Send my order to Qing Wuyo. I'll bring the light cavalry back first. Tell him to stop fighting and quickly catch up. Yes. The personal guards received the order and swiftly rode away. After the great Xia light cavalry blocked the Beiming heavy cavalry, the great Xia heavy cavalry at the back charged forward at the same time, stopping the Beiming heavy cavalry at all costs. General Qing, Marquis Xiao orders you to quickly catch up and stop fighting, Xiao Wanhua's personal guards ordered. It's too late. None of you can retreat today. Before his words landed, a young man appeared, holding mechi autumn water and blocking in front of Qing Wuyo. He abandoned the benevolent Xia Zi and charged over with killing intent. With one sword, he killed 13 enemy cavalry, causing blood and flesh to fly. The invulnerable Beiming cavalry were like paper, sliced apart by mechi autumn water. Shameless boasting, Qing Wuyo could not hide his anger, and he charged forward, waving his halberd and chopping down. As the sword and halberd clashed, the wind howled. The war horse could not withstand the huge force, and knelt down on the ground. At the same time, numerous generals charged up and surrounded the newcomer. Xia Zi was not afraid at all. One man and one sword, he suppressed everyone. The galloping war horses passed by everyone, and the two sides clashed once more. This time, the formation of the great Xia cavalry suddenly changed. They lined up into 5 horizontal lines, and each horizontal line was in a single file. The distance between each horizontal line was very wide, forming a front that was much wider than the northern Ming heavy cavalry. The first 2 horizontal lines were the great Xia heavy cavalry, while the other 3 were the light cavalry. Apart from this, there were many other light cavalry that were doing seemingly meaningless movements on both sides. After the 2 sides engaged in battle, the great Xia light cavalry immediately charged out from the huge gap between the front row of heavy cavalry and shot wave after wave with the specially made god-arm crossbows. After a few shots, the great Xia heavy cavalry quickly retreated. In the battle, Xia Zi's sword pushed away Qing Wuyo and the 4 generals. Looking at the 2 armies in the final battle, his eyes were cold. They had prepared for this battle for a long time, and they would not allow any accidents to happen. Within the Netherworld house, Ning Chun looked toward the north. He was also worried about this crucial battle. The biggest advantage of the heavy cavalry was their unparalleled ability to break formations. In the era of cold weapons, the integrity of the formation was the crux of the battle. Whether it was the Great Xia or the Northern Ming heavy cavalry, it was equally important. The first weakness of Northern Ming's heavy cavalry was that both the men and their horses were covered in heavy armor. Therefore, it was not a bad choice to use light cavalry to attack the camp at night. Even if they could not kill the heavy cavalry, they could still cause a lot of trouble for them. The other weakness of the heavy cavalry was their speed. Although the horses of Great Xia were not as fast as those of Northern Ming, the speed of the light cavalry was much faster than the heavy cavalry. They could make use of this point to drag down the heavy cavalry of Northern Ming. Of course, the prerequisite of this plan was to separate the heavy cavalry from the light cavalry. Using both the real and the fake was the best method. Great Xia's god-arm crossbows were also an important support. Regardless of whether or not they could break through armor, they would cause a lot of damage to the Northern Ming heavy cavalry. The heavy cavalry also had a fatal weakness, which was that once the soldiers fell off their horses, it would not be easy for them to get back on their horses. In a battle between cavalry, once one fell off their horse, it meant death. Furthermore, after the Northern Ming heavy cavalry were shot at, it would be hard for them to quickly retaliate. They had to maintain a tight formation and push forward. Otherwise, they would not be able to use their advantage to kill. The Great Xia cavalry only needed to attack repeatedly. Once the northern Meng heavy cavalry attacked, they would immediately split up and regroup. As the gap between the cavalry of Great Xia was large, and they were far apart, they did not need to be too tight. It was easy for them to regroup once they were far away from the northern Meng heavy cavalry. Such a charge could continue indefinitely. The northern Meng heavy cavalry could not endure such a battle. Once the northern Meng formation was messed up and their morale was shaken, it would be their chance. Xia Zi looked at the charging and retreating Great Xia cavalry with a cold expression. He believed that this time, victory would belong to Great Xia. On the battlefield, the repeated charges of the Great Xia cavalry had already caused the northern Meng heavy cavalry to suffer casualties. The heavy armor could not cover every part of the northern Meng heavy cavalry, and there would always be gaps. Whether or not one could survive a battle depended on luck. Some of the northern Meng heavy cavalry did not have such luck, and the arrows from the crossbows pierced through their eyes and killed them. As for the other northern Meng heavy cavalry, even if they were not injured by the arrows, the repeated shots caused their blood to boil, making them feel extremely uncomfortable. Exhaustion was slowly revealed in this highly tense battle. The northern Meng heavy cavalry, who had not had a good rest because of Great Xia, started to feel their stamina run out. Their morale was also becoming more and more unstable. As more and more people fell off their horses, a huge flaw appeared in the northern Meng heavy cavalry formation. Charge! The Great Xia heavy cavalry, who had been waiting for a chance, charged at the flaw of the northern Meng heavy cavalry without any regard for their lives. They did not hesitate to pay the price of their lives to break through the unbreakable formation of northern Meng. The Great Xia light cavalry swiftly gathered together, using their high speed to pull the ropes and drag the exhausted northern Meng heavy cavalry off their horses one by one. In the next moment the slaughter began. The dismounted northern Meng heavy cavalry found it difficult to move. Some were trampled by the panicked war horses, unable to get up. Some were smashed to death by the combined blunt weapons of the Great Xia cavalry. There were also some who were tied up by the Great Xia heavy cavalry and knocked to their deaths, dragging them hundreds of feet away. The cruelty of war was fully revealed at this moment. On the battlefield, no one was merciful, and it was either you die or I live. Xia Zi's autumn water was stained with fresh blood, dripping onto the ground below. Great Xia's Haowu King, who was filled with killing intent, was not weaker than any of the geniuses. The autumn water glistened, and it was unstoppable. Its killing intent shocked everyone. Qing Wuyo had died in battle, and the 4 generals had also died under the autumn water sword. The order to retreat was not given out in the end. Half a day later, the invincible northern Meng heavy cavalry was completely wiped out. Chapter 210. On the other side of the battlefield, Beiming's main army was fighting with the Great Xia Imperial Army. The battle was equally intense. Fan Lingyue looked at the stalemate between the Beiming cavalry and the Great Xia Divine Wind Battalion. He said calmly, "Abbot, it's your turn." Amitba. With a Buddhist proclamation, the abbot of Dui Temple walked out. His footsteps were steady, and every step he took shook the heavens and the earth. The sudden change shocked the Great Xia soldiers. The Buddha descends to the mortal realm, and a vast power spread out. In the academy, the dean felt the power of the Transcendent's 5 tribulations in the distance. His expression changed. Just as he was about to move, he was stopped by a huge palm. "Dean, your opponent is me." The golden staff rang, and the imperial tutor of Beiming appeared, blocking the dean. In King Haowu's camp, the military head also felt the vigorous Buddhist power. His expression changed, and he immediately used a secret technique to summon the other 3 heads. Even with the Confucian sect's heaven-trapping formation, he could not defeat the Buddha alone. On the northern battlefield, the Buddha descends to the mortal realm. The Great Xia Imperial Army was immediately defeated. In the world, no matter how strong the formation was, it could not stop the Transcendent's 5 tribulations. When the Buddha descends to the mortal realm, the ground collapsed and huge rocks flew. It was extremely terrifying. Retreat! At the moment of crisis, Marquis Blood-Robed walked out. Blocking the Buddha descends to the mortal realm. The panicked Great Xia Guard's Legion Corps reacted and retreated without hesitation. The Beiming cavalry caught up, and a flood spread out, quickly drowning the Great Xia Imperial Army. Marquis Blood-Robed, who was blocking the abbot of Dui Temple, did not have the energy to care about anything else. After fighting Martial Lord Yongya, this Great Xia Martial Marquis was once again facing an Transcendence 5 Tribulations expert. Facing an invincible opponent, Marquis Bloodrobe's expression was calm. His blood-red clothes fluttered in the wind, and he stood tall like a mountain. Marquis. The hundreds of personal guards who had followed Marquis Bloodrobed through life and death for more than 10 years had tears in their eyes. They were unwilling to leave. Retreat! Marquis Bloodrobed ordered again. They could not disobey, and could only retreat. The moment they turned around, tears stained their clothes as they bid farewell to Marquis Bloodrobed. Marquis Bloodrobe's hands quickly flipped, and blood cheese spread out. Amitabha. There was no expression on the withered face of the Buddha in the mortal world. After he chanted the Buddha's name, his whole body shone with golden light. The shocking Buddha's move reappeared in the world. Amidst the rumbling collision, the 3 kilometers long ground was completely devastated, and dust shook the sky as it completely drowned the figures of the 2 people. After this day, the Marquis of Bloodrobe did not return. After the Marquis of Wangchuan, another Marquis of the Great Xia dynasty had died in battle. The place where the 2 armies faced off against each other had been completely turned into ruins, telling the story of how tragic this battle had been. By the time the 4 Confucian sect heads and the 300 strongest experts of the Confucian sect arrived, the battle was already over, and not a single person was left alive. After this battle, Beiming and Great Xia both suffered heavy losses. The Beiming heavy cavalry was wiped out, and Great Xia's God Wind unit suffered heavy losses, losing more than 60% of their men. Since the start of the war between the 2 dynasties, Beiming's invincible golden body was broken for the first time. However, due to the death of Marquis Bloodrobed, no one was happy. When night fell, after Ningchen heard the news, he fell completely silent and did not say another word. In the distant palace, after receiving 2 battle reports, one happy and one sad, Xia Mingri sighed deeply. His heart was extremely complicated. In Weiyang Palace, Zhang Sun looked out of the window, a trace of loneliness flashing in his eyes. This war had changed too many things. The Marquis of Great Xia, like him, and the Marquis of Bloodrobed were true heroes. At the same time, in the west, northwest, north and southeast of Great Xia, all the Marquis of Great Xia poured a cup of wine in the direction where the Marquis of Bloodrobed had died. Yellow springs first, and one day we will meet in hell. Perhaps it was heartless, but Ningchen quickly recovered from his sadness. He once again picked up the army map and made the next step of the plan. Beiming still had close to 60,000 cavalry and 50,000 infantry, and they were still a great threat. Moreover, the reinforcements of Beiming outside Heaven's Gate were getting closer and closer. Marquis Xiang and the others were also struggling to deal with them. Once these reinforcements broke through the defense line and entered Heaven's Gate, the situation of Great Xia would immediately become irreversible. In Beiming's camp, Fan Lingyue sat in a wheelchair, looking at Xiao Wanhua and the other generals kneeling in front of him. After a long time, he sighed in his heart and said, "Get up." Now was the time to use people, and she couldn't kill all the generals. The defeat of the heavy cavalry this time was a lesson. He indeed didn't disappoint her, and in the end, he even became her strongest enemy. Now that the heavy cavalry was completely wiped out, it would take some effort to deal with the incoming reinforcements. "Abbot, I still have 2 requests. After you complete them, I will set you free," Fan Lingyue said calmly, glancing at the Buddha beside him. "Amitabha, I hope you will keep your word," the abbot of Dui Temple said. "Of course." Fan Lingyue's eyes flashed coldly as he replied. In King Haowu's camp, Ningchen looked at the army map and pondered for a long time. He slowly said, "For the next step, Beiming's target is 70% the reinforcements of the barbarian dynasty, and 30% is the remaining imperial army of Great Xia. We have to take a gamble. Why not my cavalry? We just defeated the heavy cavalry of Beimeng, so we should be seen as a thorn in their side, Xia Zi asked. Ningchen shook his head and said, Our opponent is Fan Lingyue. She sees it clearer than anyone else. Although we defeated Beimeng's heavy cavalry, almost all of our heavy cavalry were destroyed, and we also lost more than 7,000 light cavalry. The fact that Great Xia's cavalry can't defeat Beimeng's heavy cavalry won't change because of this victory. Relatively speaking, the biggest threat to Beimeng now is the 100,000 reinforcements of the barbarian dynasty and the remaining imperial army of Great Xia. Xia Zi nodded and said seriously, It's not easy. Our opponent is the abbot of Dui Temple, an expert who has surpassed the fifth tribulation. He will always be a huge threat. Ningchen turned around and came to the front of the tent. He looked at Beimeng's camp in the distance, and the light in his eyes kept flickering. The current situation was indeed not optimistic. Today, the dean didn't come in time, which meant that he was restrained by someone and couldn't leave the academy. Moreover, the headmaster wouldn't interfere in these matters, and the senior was missing. Great Xia's combat strength above the fifth tribulation was at a complete disadvantage. One could only understand how terrifying a three-tribulation expert was by experiencing it personally. He was a real monster that couldn't be defeated by thousands of soldiers and horses. Ningchen turned around and asked, You know more about the Confucian sect than I do. Can we stop the abbot of Dui Temple with the sky-trapping formation, set up by the four heads, and the 300 strongest experts of the Confucian sect? We can fight, but we need time, Xia Zi replied. How long? Ningchen asked seriously. The longer the better, Xia Zi said. The sky-trapping formation of the Confucian sect was passed down by the headmaster. It was extremely exquisite, and the longer the formation was set up, the stronger its power would be. However, this formation also had its limitations. It needed time to set it up. When the formation was first set up, its power was relatively weak. It didn't have a high chance of trapping an expert like the Buddha in the mortal world. Ningchen narrowed his eyes slightly. This was really troublesome. Now that he didn't have a weapon like the blood-veined sword, he definitely couldn't be a match for the Buddha in the mortal world. Ningchen thought for a long time. He walked to the table and wrote a letter. He handed it to Xia Zi and said, Send someone to send it back to the palace as soon as possible. Xia Zi read the letter and frowned. However, he didn't say anything. He immediately walked out of the tent and handed the letter to the guard beside him. He said, Send this letter back to the palace immediately. Yes. The guard received the order and quickly left. It was getting late. Ningchen didn't stay any longer and left in the ghost carriage. Thunder rumbled in Ascension Valley. The aura that was blocked by the realm was still extremely terrifying. Waves of pressure spread out, making people feel a bone-deep fear. A bunch of trash. The angry roar shook the heavens and the earth, causing the ground to shake. The valley shook, and huge rocks fell down. The woman in red and the others were angry, but they didn't dare to say anything. They lowered their heads deeply to hide their expressions. Calamity King, please calm down. Fan Lingyue's strength is not bad, and there are constantly experts helping him. If we want to kill him, there are too many variables if we can't kill him in one strike. The middle-aged man in blue raised his head and said. There was a moment of silence in the realm. After a long time, the void shook violently. A green arrow penetrated the realm and arrived in Ascension Valley. This is the heaven-pardoning arrow. It can help you. As for the bow, the Zhao family left a bow in the eastern state a long time ago. You can use this arrow to find it. Remember, I don't want to hear any news of your failure this time. Yes. The middle-aged man in blue, the woman in red, and Xiao Pejuan bowed respectfully and replied. The three of them left with the heaven-pardoning arrow. In the netherworld, Ningchen didn't know that the target of Ascension Valley had temporarily shifted to him. He also didn't know that the broken death bow in his hand was the bow that the Zhao family left in the eastern state a long time ago. Back then, the disabled young man mentioned the Zhao family before he died. However, Ningchen didn't care. There was no Zhao family in the Divine Prefecture. Or rather, There was no Zhao family that he was afraid of. After Ning Chun returned to the netherworld, he had been thinking about how to deal with the abbot of Dui Temple. When night fell, Ning Chun left the netherworld and headed towards a few small cities far away from everyone's sight. He didn't trust anyone. He could only do it with his own hands. In the distance, the barbarian army was getting closer and closer. There were a total of 100,000 soldiers, and they were coming in a mighty manner. They seemed so huge when both Great Xia and Northern Meng were heavily injured. In Northern Meng's camp, violent coughing sounds came from the commander's tent. In the tent, a delicate figure sat in a wheelchair. She covered her mouth with her right hand, but she couldn't stop the blood from flowing out. Her beautiful and gentle face was extremely pale at this moment, and it was hard to see a trace of blood. Bright red blood kept dripping onto her blue dress, dyeing it red. Then it dyed the ground red. The wisest person in the world, the military advisor of Northern Meng, the first person below the Khanate realm, was finally coming to the end of his life. He was like a candle flame in the cold wind and rain, and could be extinguished at any time. The war between Great Xia and Northern Meng had been going on for too long. No matter who won or lost, it was time to end it. Chapter 211. 7 days later, the barbarian army finally stepped into the north of Great Xia, getting closer and closer to the front lines of the war. The Northern Meng army moved south faster and faster. In the final stage of his life, Fan Lingyue endured his illness and stubbornly carried on with the Northern Meng's great cause. Marquis Bloodcloth died in battle, and Marquis Taiping, who was transferred back to the imperial city, could only go north again to help Duke Jingwu resist the Northern Meng army. After a series of battles, less than 50,000 of the 210,000 imperial guards were left. Since the establishment of Great Xia, this was the first time they had been beaten so badly. Northern Meng's 60,000 cavalry were still invincible, and with the support of 50,000 infantry, the crisis of Great Xia was not over yet. Most importantly, Fan Lingyue was still alive, and this was the real threat. In the Northern Meng army, the worry on Xiao Wanhua's face grew stronger by the day. He had personally arranged for 19 guards to guard the commander's tent day and night, and no one was allowed to approach without permission. The commander really might not be able to hold on any longer. Marquis Xiao. A tired voice came from the tent. After hearing the summons, Xiao Wanhua immediately entered the commander's tent. In front of him, Fan Lingyue's face was full of fatigue. Although her face was still beautiful, there was no trace of blood. How far is the barbarian army? Fan Lingyue asked. 300 miles. Xiao Wanhua replied. Fan Lingyue's expression did not change. She nodded and said, I know. You may leave. Yes. Xiao Wanhua bowed respectfully and left. Cough cough. Fan Lingyue coughed and wiped the blood from her mouth. She tiredly raised her head and looked at the distant south. The final moment was finally coming. On the road to the north, one carriage after another rushed forward. After coming out of the Great Xia Palace, they had not stopped for several days and nights. When the horses were tired, they changed horses. When the people were tired, they changed horses. The horses did not stop and traveled north at the fastest speed. In the netherworld, Ningchen also rested for several days and nights, doing his best to prepare for the upcoming battle. Outside the fog forest, Xiao Pejuan and the others who came out of Ascension Valley found this place with the help of the heaven-pardoning arrow. However, this feeling disappeared 5 days ago. 5 days ago, Ning Chun went out of hell for the last time. For the next few days, he didn't take a single step out of hell. The connection between the heaven-pardoning arrow and the broken death bow was cut off by the underworld and lost their effectiveness. The three of them did not know what was going on. After waiting for 5 days, the three of them still didn't find anything. They had no choice but to search elsewhere. Ningchen didn't know that he had been lucky enough to avoid a disaster for the time being. When the war came, he would be able to focus on fighting. In the easternmost region, two figures slowly walked over step by step. The sun rose and set, constantly approaching the end of the world. The person sitting in front of the primal chaos fog, sea was still waiting quietly. It was unknown when a sword embryo that could be used to forge swords would appear. A few days ago, a man's cultivation had muddle-headedly stepped into the 5th grade natal realm. Even Yin Qin Wang could not help but laugh, not knowing what to say. The sea of primal chaos roiled, and when the two of them approached, a man saw Mu Bai sitting at the end of the world. Shock appeared on her little face, and she pointed. "Senior, there's someone over there." "Yes, I saw it," Prince Yin replied softly, and continued walking forward. The two peak experts of the world met once more. There was nothing special. The two of them looked at each other and nodded. It could be considered a greeting. "Waiting for the sword?" asked Prince Yen. "Waiting for the sword," replied Mu Bai. After the short battle in Beimeng, the two of them met again. It was still as calm as water without any ripples. The Battle of the Sand Sword had already become a thing of the past. No one cared about it. A man looked at Mu Bai, then at Prince Yen. She couldn't understand what was going on between the two of them. Mu Bai also noticed a man behind Prince Yen. After looking at her, he nodded. A genius in the sword. What a pity. This little girl's sword heart was clear, and her talent was truly extraordinary. She was a rare genius, not the slightest bit inferior to Mu Qingxue. It was a pity that she didn't have any sword intent. That meant she hadn't stepped onto the sword path. "Let nature take its course," said Prince Yen calmly. "Uncle, here's a pear for you." A man ran forward and took out a pear from her little bag. Ning Chen had taught her that she should give something to an elder the first time she met one. A man didn't understand why, but she still did it. Mu Bai was startled. He looked at Prince Yen in confusion. "You taught her?" Prince Yen shook his head. "No, Ning Chen taught her." "Ha!" Mu Bai was relieved. That little brat really was a rare freak. A man cutely extended her hand to take the pear. Mu Bai took the pear and softly asked, "What's your name?" "A man." A man obediently replied. Mu Bai faintly smiled. "A man, uncle can't take your pear for free. How about this, I'll give you a sword." A trace of red appeared on Mu Bai's finger. He touched a man's forehead and disappeared a moment later. "Thank you, uncle." A man brightly smiled. She was a bit naive and a bit happy. She didn't realize just how valuable that sword was. A pear in exchange for a drop of desolate city's sword blood. Only a man could encounter such a good thing. Ning Chen had been afraid a man would be taken advantage of, so he had taught her a bunch of random things. For example, giving things to an elder. The meaning was very obvious. A junior girl had given something, so as an elder, how could you not reciprocate? Of course, if Ning Chen had done it himself, Mu Bai wouldn't have bothered. There were differences between people. No one would deny this. After giving the gift, Prince Yen brought a man away from Mu Bai and the other swords, and waited for the 5th tribulation to arrive. He had a feeling that the last tribulation would come soon. Compared to the peace at the end of the world, in the north of Great Xia, the atmosphere of war was getting heavier by the day. It was so heavy that everyone couldn't breathe. With the threat of Dewey Temple's abbot, the Great Xia Imperial Army, light cavalry, and barbarian reinforcements didn't dare to gather together. They were afraid that once they lost, they would be completely wiped out. The 4 heads of the Confucian sect and the 300 strongest Confucian sect experts hid among the barbarian reinforcements, patiently waiting for an opportunity to attack. They had to be very careful when facing an existence above the 5th tribulation. Ning Chen and Xia Zi bet on the barbarian reinforcements. They believed that compared to the Great Xia Imperial Army, Fan Lingyue should be more concerned about the threat of the barbarian army. Ning Chen was no stranger to the commander of the barbarian army. He was the barbarian king's 3rd son, a man's elder brother, and the current crown prince barbarian. Compared to the luxuriant branches of the Great Xia imperial family, the barbarian king had fewer children. A man was the youngest princess, and had been the apple of the barbarian king's eye since she was young. She was deeply loved by her brothers. Therefore, the crown prince barbarian didn't like Ning Chen. Due to his relationship with a man, Ning Chen could only turn a blind eye to the crown prince barbarian's unfriendly attitude and pretend he didn't see it. On the 15th night, the bright moon hung high in the sky, illuminating the world as bright as day. In the distance, the northern Meng army rumbled over, their cavalry clanging and clanging. The condition of Fan Lingyue's body was kept a secret. Very few people knew the truth. On northern Meng's side, Xiao Wanhua was now in command of the three armies, and had full authority to deal with everything. As for Fan Lingyue, unless it was necessary, he almost never showed himself. However, Ning Chen could see from the increasing speed of the northern Meng army that Fan Lingyue might not be able to hold on much longer. Time was an extremely important matter for the two armies now. The two armies clashed, the cavalry against the barbarian soldiers, the sound of drums shaking the heavens, and the sound of battle deafening. The abbot of Dewey Temple appeared. Step by step, Buddhist light spread for 3,000 zhang, shaking heaven and earth. Wherever the Buddhist power passed, the barbarian army formation within several hundred zhang collapsed, and the cavalry behind them charged past. In the army, Ning Chen covered his face with a devil mask and blocked the path of the Dewey Temple's abbot, a cold glint flashing through his eyes. He didn't believe that the Buddha in the mortal world was still as invincible as before. How could he be completely fine after being nailed to Mount Mijia and burned for so many days? Amitabha, benefactor, we meet again. How have you been? The abbot of Dewey Temple recognized the face behind the mask at a glance and chanted. You're too polite, Ning Chen replied coldly. Behind him, the four masters of the Confucian sect and the 300 experts of the Confucian sect quickly set up a formation. In an instant, an awe-inspiring righteousness rose and swept away all the soldiers within 1,000 zhang radius. With a series of bangs, countless large chests were brought over by Xia Zi's personal guards. Each of them was placed far away in front of the Buddha in the mortal world. Do you still recognize these things? Ning Chen asked indifferently. The chests were opened one by one, and scrolls of ancient books came into view. The Buddhist kingdom's thousands of years of inheritance were all placed inside. The abbot of Dewey Temple frowned. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a loud bang. The chests closest to him suddenly exploded, and scraps of paper and bamboo flew all over the sky. Gunpowder. Have you heard of it? I also forgot which chest contained it, and I also don't remember when it will explode. It just depends on whether the abbot is willing to try his luck, Ning Chen said unhurriedly. The abbot of Dewey Temple's abbot's eyes were filled with killing intent. Suddenly, there was another loud bang, and a chest of ancient Buddhist books disappeared between heaven and earth again. I forgot to tell you that the Buddhist sect's Saraira and the first copy of the Vajra indestructible body are also inside. I just forgot which chest they are in, Ning Chen said coldly. The abbot's expression changed slightly. His figure flashed, and he arrived in front of a chest 300 zhang away. Just as he was about to reach out, another explosion rang out. A huge shockwave spread out, and even someone as powerful as the Buddha in the mortal world couldn't help but take half a step back. His ears were stinging. Ning Chen sneered as he watched the abbot of Dewey Temple rush between the chests, trying his best to prevent the Buddhist sect's thousands of years of hard work from being destroyed. Explosions rang out one after another. Fuses of different lengths caused continuous explosions. Every time the Buddha in the mortal world was lucky enough to save a chest, more would be destroyed. Taking advantage of this time, the experts of the Confucian sect continued to operate the formation, and the awe-inspiring righteousness became stronger and stronger. Boom! Another loud bang rang out, and flames soared into the sky. The abbot of Dewey Temple took 2 steps back, and a trace of red appeared at the corner of his mouth. Chapter 212. The debris floating in the air was a symbol of the powerlessness of the Buddhas, and also a catalyst for the anger of the Buddhas in the mortal world. The furious abbot of Dewey Temple shouted angrily, and the light of Buddha around him shot towards Ning Chen. The terrifying power of Buddha shook the heavens and the earth. At this moment, the righteous chi crashed onto the Buddhas in the mortal world. This was the first time in 1,000 years that Buddhas and Confucians had a battle above the innate realm. Suddenly, the heavens and the earth collapsed, and everything was turned into ruins. The earth flipped over, and huge rocks and large pieces of land flew up, exploded and scattered all over the sky. The 4 leaders of the Confucians held the 4 sages of Confucianism, and attracted the righteous qi to their bodies. They caused the heavens to collapse, and they fought against the Buddhas in the mortal world. The abbot of Dewey Temple put his palms together, and golden light rose. The swastika turned into golden chains, and the light of Buddha shone brightly, supporting the world of Buddhism. The 300 most powerful cultivators of the Confucians used the power of the formation to suppress the increasing power of Buddha. The battle between Buddhas and Confucians was earth-shattering. The illusory figures were the 4 leaders moving quickly. The white righteous qi rolled and vibrated, and it crashed onto the golden chains around the Buddhas, making clanging sounds. Outside the formation, the bow of death in Ning Chen's hand shone brightly, and it was still aimed at the Buddhas in the mortal world. After releasing his power for a long time, blood mist appeared on his body. However, Ning Chen did not dare to put down the bow in his hand, because he knew that he only had one chance, and he had to seize it. Even if the heaven-trapping formation could trap the Buddhas in the mortal world, it could only trap them this time, and there would be a next time. He could not delay for so long every time, and he had to solve this problem in this battle. Xia Zi stood behind him, and with a flip of his palm, he injected his genuine qi into Ning Chen's body. Suddenly, the silver arrow shone brighter, and everyone present was shocked. The abbot of Dewey Temple felt a sense of danger. He looked at the arrow in the distance and his eyelids twitched. When the bow of death appeared, the heaven-pardoning arrow sensed it from afar, and it turned into a ray of green light and flew towards the north. Xiao Pejuan and the rest were stunned for a moment, and immediately followed, heading north. In the north, the battle between northern Meng and the barbarian army was getting more and more intense. The steel cavalry was obviously superior. In addition, the abbot of Dewey Temple had destroyed the barbarian army's defensive formation. After the steel cavalry charged in, the barbarian army was even more overwhelmed. It was obvious that the northern Meng army had no intention of continuing the battle. After breaking through the barbarian soldiers, they continued to advance southward. Soldiers were constantly clashing and withdrawing, and in between, there was an even more desperate battle between the Buddhists and Confucians. Some of the Confucian sect's 300 experts began to fall. After being swept by the Buddhist energy, their bodies exploded and they died. The 4 sect masters were also injured. In a battle between the strong and the weak, even if the sky-trapping matrix was extraordinarily exquisite, the people in the matrix still found it difficult to withstand the terrifying pressure that surpassed the 5 tribulations. The abbot of Dewey Temple formed a seal with his fingers. In an instant, the sky was filled with golden light. The seal of the swastika was scattered between heaven and earth. The chanting of Sanskrit was heard. While everyone was shocked, the world-revered one's chanting appeared again. Ho ma and I ba mi ho. The world-revered one's chanting, the mantra of Dewey. The 6 huge golden words condensed the supreme holy power of the Buddhist sect and pressed down. The 4 sect masters' expressions were solemn. Their 4 palms intertwined, and a vast righteous aura rose rapidly. In the next moment, the golden scroll unfolded, and golden words appeared one after another. The dazzling golden words emitted an extremely bright light. Immediately, the wind and clouds changed, and the powerful pressure multiplied again. The Confucian sect's secret technique appeared again in the world. Boundless learning. The 2 extremes collided, and a loud explosion sounded. In the chaos, the blood of the Confucian sect experts exploded, dyeing the world red. The 4 of them were all injured. They retreated several steps, and their mouths were red. The abbot of Dewey Temple also could not withstand the powerful collision, and he retreated 2 steps. Now, in the distance, Ning Chen, who had been watching the battle, released his right hand. The silver arrow whizzed forward, and in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived in front of the Buddha in the mortal world. The arrow entered the abbot's body, and he retreated several steps. The abbot of Dewey Temple clutched his chest, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Ning Chen shot another arrow, but unfortunately, it was shattered by the Buddha in the mortal world, who reacted. "Abbot, you are indeed not as strong as before," Ning Chen said with a cold smile. The abbot of Dewey Temple found it difficult to maintain his Buddhist heart. His anger rose and he moved his feet. He wanted to break through the heaven-trapping formation and tear the person in front of him into pieces. Hatred was always the most terrifying thing that covered reason. The Buddha in the mortal world, who had lost his reason, became even more ruthless, and the pressure on the surrounding Confucian sect experts increased. However, the price for the ruthlessness of his moves was the sudden increase of his flaws. The 4 Confucian sect heads took the opportunity to trap the sky with their orders. 4 sky-piercing chains appeared and swept through the holy orders. After the first one passed through the chest, it immediately disappeared. The abbot of Dewey Temple trembled. Before he could react, the Buddhist power around him froze, and he could not circulate it. At this moment, the other 3 sky-piercing chains formed a triangle around the Buddha in the mortal world. They flickered a few times and then disappeared. "Damn it!" the abbot of Dewey Temple shouted angrily, and the Buddhist power of heaven and earth exploded. In an instant, the earth and sky within 1,000 feet were destroyed. Everyone was affected, and they were heavily injured. Puffed! The sound of people vomiting blood rang out one after another. As the dust fell, the Buddha in the mortal world disappeared without a trace. Ning Chun and Xia Zi instantly entered the formation. They waved their hands to disperse the dust, but they could no longer see the Buddha in the mortal world. Ning Chun's expression became unsightly. They had still let him escape. "Don't worry. With the sky-piercing chains around him, he won't be able to use his cultivation for a short period of time. It won't be a matter of a day or 2 if he wants to break free," Xia Zi consoled. Ning Chun nodded. "Quickly help the barbarian army regroup. Northern Ming's army is moving faster and faster. We also need to speed up." "Yes." Xia Zi nodded. They really did need to hurry. Northern Ming's army was currently moving like a madman. If they weren't careful, they would disappear right in front of their eyes. After cleaning up the battlefield, the remaining Confucian sect experts also left to recuperate. After this battle, the 4 Confucian sect heads and the other Confucian sect experts had suffered disastrous losses. They urgently needed time to recuperate. Ning Chun and Xia Zi were the last to leave. Xia Zi wanted to return to his camp, while Ning Chun also wanted to return to the underworld. However, at this moment, 3 powerful auras pressed down from the distance, startling the 2 of them. "It's you guys again. It's you." Xiao Pejuan's group and Ning Chun hadn't expected that they would meet again so soon. It really was a case of enemies meeting on a narrow road. "So that bow is in your hands," said Xiao Pejuan coldly when he saw the bow in Ning Chun's hand. Ning Chun frowned. He still didn't understand what was going on. "There's no need to waste words with him. We can settle old and new grudges at the same time," said the red-robed woman hatefully. The 3 of them automatically ignored Xia Zi. After all, not all Hotian experts were strong enough to cause Xiantian experts to fear them. Unfortunately, their luck wasn't good. They had once again come at the wrong time. If he had come a little later and allowed Xia Zi and Ning Chun to separate, Ning Chun would have died without a doubt. They didn't know that if it weren't for Ning Chun's arrow, Xia Zi would have already stepped into the Xiantian realm. In the past, the Grand Xiao's crown prince's talent didn't lose to anyone. His only weakness was that he cared too much about relationships. "They're from Ascension Valley?" asked Xia Zi. He had also guessed their identities. "Yes," replied Ning Chun. "They really came at the right time." Xia Zi's hand moved, and the 1-meter autumn water appeared in his hand. His figure moved, and the autumn water filled the sky. Xiao Pejuan was startled. His Kata saber met it head-on. With a bang, heaven and earth exploded. Ning Chun also took out his ink sword. His sword swept out, and his sword intent cut through heaven and earth. The remaining 2 hastily used their techniques to block this terrifying sword. The former Marshal Marquis and the former Crown Prince had both changed. Ning Chun had become stronger, and Xia Zi was no longer as benevolent as before. When the battle began, the 3 of them immediately fell into a bitter struggle. They couldn't gain the slightest advantage. Xia Zi and Ning Chun's cooperation wasn't as seamless as Ning Chun and Fan Lingyue's, and they couldn't feel their sword auras. However, Xia Zi's body was at its peak, and his battle strength wasn't weaker than anyone else. 2 against 3, but the minority actually had the upper hand. The three of them were shocked. When did the younger generation of Heaven's Reach become so powerful? They didn't know that they were just unlucky. The people they met were all the most stunning people in the world. Above the autumn water, the sword light carried the overwhelming righteous chi that hadn't completely dissipated. Each sword was stronger than the previous one, and the three of them were in an extremely difficult situation. In that moment of carelessness, the heaven pardon arrow automatically flew out, sweeping towards Ning Chun. Oh no! The three of them were startled. Just as they were about to stop it, they were stopped by a waterfall of autumn water. They had no choice but to counterattack. Ning Chun grabbed the heaven pardon arrow, and the Deathbreaker bow on his back immediately reacted. The bow and arrow cried out together, reuniting after countless years. Many thanks for the generous gift. Ning Chun pulled the bow and arrow. In an instant thunder roared and heaven and earth changed. Bolts of angry thunder descended, and a green brilliance flourished. It roared and surged, shaking the 9 heavens. Retreat! The blue-clothed middle-aged man was shocked. He stamped his foot and immediately fled. Xiao Pejuan and the red-clothed woman were also shocked by the terrifying power of the arrow. They turned and fled. There had never been a moment when the three of them were so fast. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace. Ning Chun sneered and put away the Deathbreaker bow and heaven pardon arrow. He only had one arrow, and there was no need to waste it here. I'm leaving. Ning Chun summoned the ghost palanquin and quickly left. Xia Zi also left, returning to his own camp. The desolation after the great battle lingered on the ground. The cold wind blew, and it was bleak and desolate. Many old soldiers said that being able to die on the battlefield was also a good thing. However, who would want to die? They only had things they wanted to protect. Sometimes, those things were even more important than their lives. The northern Ming army was heading south, heading straight for the Grand Xia's imperial city. The flags of victory fluttered in the dark night. Fan Lingyue sat in the carriage, surrounded by information and maps. Other than that, there was nothing else. Xiao Wanhua followed closely beside the carriage, not willing to leave even half a step. He was waiting for orders from the carriage. They weren't far from the Grand Xia's imperial city. Success or failure, it would be decided in less than a month. Whether it was man's will or heaven's will that couldn't be defied, perhaps the answer would be revealed soon. Chapter 213. The autumn wind started to cool down. 3 days later, the north of Great Xia, which rarely rained during summer, started to rain heavily. Both the northern Ming and Great Xia armies stopped as it was difficult for them to move. At this most critical moment, there was a temporary pause in the war. The commanders of the armies looked at the rain in silence. Ning Chun saw the rain, and also didn't leave the underworld for 3 days. Looking at the heaven-parting arrow in his hand, hesitation flashed across his eyes. The rain continued for 2 days. After 2 days, the rain gradually lessened. In the northern Ming camp, Fan Lingyue came out of her tent for the first time. Sitting in her wheelchair, she looked at the sky outside. Her once beautiful and bright eyes had now lost 80 to 90% of their radiance. She coughed lightly and blood fell, flowing into the distance along with the rain. In the tent, Jingye Taichu kept crying out as if he felt his master's end. The 19 personal guards stood to the side, not saying a word as they quietly guarded their military advisor. Unknowingly, the rain had stopped and the dark clouds in the sky dispersed. Fan Lingyue raised her head and said softly, "Break camp and move out." Yes. The 19 guards bowed respectfully and went to pass down the order. Night fell. In the underworld, Ning Chun saw the rain stop. After a long silence, he kept the heaven-parting arrow and left on the ghost carriage. The remaining 70,000 soldiers of the barbarian dynasty, the Great Xia Guards, and 18,000 light cavalry quickly headed south. The light cavalry sped up and circled to the front of the northern Ming army, restricting their pace. The Great Xia Guards traveled day and night, rushing toward a city in the distance. This was the last barrier before the Great Xia imperial city, the place where the final battle would take place. In the northern Ming palace, the festive atmosphere could be felt everywhere. The marriage of the emperor was a big matter for the entire northern Ming court. After the Donglin Wang family entered northern Meng, they quickly took root. With the support of the royal family, they quickly became a strong competitor for the 11th aristocratic family. The Wang family had no roots in northern Meng and had to choose to work with the royal family. The two had a mutually beneficial relationship, and it was a good way to suppress the other aristocratic families. Su Fian entering the palace as the empress was something that couldn't be changed. Fan Lingyue pushed for this matter, and her attitude became stronger day by day. Even Mingyu couldn't do anything about it. Having gate pass, Yang Hong, who had always been guarding this place, left for the first time. He came to northern Meng's camp and left with Fan Lingyue. In the evening, a letter was delivered to King Hao's camp. Xia Zi waited for Ning Chun to arrive before handing him the letter without asking any questions. After Ning Chun finished reading the letter in his hand, he didn't say anything and directly rode the ghost palanquin up north. In Beiming Imperial Palace, in a brightly lit palace, Mingyu sat in front of a mirror. All the palace maids and eunuchs in the palace had been dismissed. Fan Lingyue stood behind Mingyu, her beautiful face filled with gentleness as she carefully dressed Mingyu. The figures in the mirror, one big and one small, were equally beautiful and peaceful. One's beautiful side would only be revealed in front of the most important person. At this moment, Fan Lingyue was no longer the #1 military advisor of northern Meng, but an elder sister who was grooming her younger sister. To Fan Lingyue, the marriage of Mingyue was extremely meaningful. It was finally time for the little girl he had brought up by himself to get married. Sister Lingyue, do you think the bad guys will come? Mingyu asked softly. I will. Fan Lingyue smiled warmly. A happy smile appeared on Mingyu's face. If her sister said that he would come, then he would definitely come. After grooming her, Fan Lingyue helped Mingyu put on the dragon robe and crown. The little girl who was still pretty just now immediately looked a little like an emperor. The two walked out of the back palace hand in hand and walked towards the front palace. In the main palace, all the important ministers of northern Meng had arrived, as well as the patriarchs of the 10 great families. At this moment, they were all sitting respectfully in the palace, not daring to be the slightest bit impolite. Everyone present knew that she had returned. Northern Meng's military advisor had returned. Fan Lingyue's status and prestige in northern Meng imperial court had long surpassed all the emperors since ancient times. Emperors had powerful ministers, treacherous ministers, and jesters. However, in the 8 years that Fan Lingyue was in power, all the ministers prostrated themselves and no one dared to overstep their boundaries. The almost deified military advisor of northern Meng relied on her existence alone to intimidate the entire northern Meng imperial court, forcing everyone to suppress the thoughts in their hearts. The moment Fan Lingyue appeared with Mingyu, everyone subconsciously straightened their bodies and sat more properly. On the other side, Su Fian, who was dressed in red, was also supported by palace maids into the main palace. Her head was covered with a red veil, covering her beautiful face. Fan Lingyue nodded in satisfaction, then walked towards one of the 2 empty seats in the main palace. After an emperor was married, the etiquette was very complicated. Mingyu didn't like trouble and resolutely objected. The old minister in charge of all the affairs in the imperial court had no choice but to remove most of the complicated etiquette, leaving only the most important part. The guests had all arrived. The emperor and empress were in their seats, and the ceremony was about to begin. However, the person that Mingyu was waiting for hadn't arrived yet. The little girl was a little anxious, looking at Fan Lingyue on the seat with a questioning look on her face. Fan Lingyue smiled, indicating that there was no need to be anxious. At this moment in the palace, a ghost palanquin rushed over. Before the patrolling guards could react, they were shocked by the sword intent coming from the palanquin. The ghost palanquin came to the front of the main palace. Ningchen walked out, waved his hand to keep the ghost palanquin, and walked in directly. Everyone present was stunned. After a short moment of absent-mindedness, they immediately realized who the person was. This time was different from the past. The portrait of the great Xia Jiming Marquis had already spread throughout the entire northern Meng imperial court. In addition, There were very few people in the world who could break into the northern Ming imperial palace. After thinking about it, it wasn't hard to guess. After seeing Ning Chen, Ming Yu's anxious little face immediately smiled happily. If it wasn't for the fact that she couldn't be too casual in front of so many people, she would have already pounced on him. Sit. Fan Lingyue looked at the seat beside him and said calmly. Ning Chen didn't refuse. He walked forward and sat on it. Many of the officials were dissatisfied, but no one dared to object. Only the old minister nodded at Ning Chen with a smile as a greeting. Ning Chen also nodded in return. He had seen this old man before. The last time he kidnapped little Mingyu, this old man was the most furious. Under the red veil, Su Fian felt Ning Chen's aura. Her slender hands clenched until they turned white. Just as she was about to hold it in, she heard a cold snort. She was so shocked that she immediately retracted her killing intent and forcefully suppressed her hatred. Only then did Fan Lingyue retract his cold gaze. He looked at Ning Chen beside him and said calmly, "Everything will be dealt with in the future." Ning Chen nodded. He also realized who the girl under the red veil was. However, today was Ming Yu's wedding day. Everything had to be dealt with in the future. The ceremony began. Ming Yu and Su Fian had to toast to the elders. Originally, the first cup of wine was to be toasted to the imperial father and imperial mother. However, when Ming Yu was just born, the old emperor and empress had already passed away. This cup of wine could only be toasted to the other elders. There were still many relatives in the imperial family, and there were also many who were of extremely high seniority. However, Ming Yu's first cup of wine was still toasted to Fan Lingyue. An elder sister was like a mother. In Ming Yu's eyes, Fan Lingyue was both her elder sister and her mother. This cup of wine was a matter of course. None of the officials present said anything. Even the few elders of the imperial family were silent. They really didn't dare to accept the first cup of wine from His Majesty. In this world, only Fan Lingyue could accept it. Fan Lingyue took the cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. The warmth in her eyes was so thick that it couldn't be dissipated. From today onwards, even if the little girl had grown up, she could finally leave in peace. For the second cup of wine, Ming Yu still didn't toast to the few elders of the imperial family. Instead, she walked in front of Ning Chen and passed the cup of wine over. The old minister was shocked. Just as he was about to speak, he was stopped. Fan Lingyue lightly shook her head. Her meaning was clear. Let her be. Ning Chen didn't care what others thought. He took the cup of wine and subconsciously reached out to rub the little girl's head. However, he discovered that Ming Yu had once again put on the crown. Ning Chen smiled lightly. He had almost forgotten that little Ming Yu was now the emperor again. The wine in his mouth was a bit spicy, a bit bitter and astringent, but also a bit mellow. It was a complex mix of flavors, making one unable to tell if it was bitter or sweet. The third cup of wine was toasted by Ming Yu to the old minister. This old man who had always been at odds with her was really getting older and older in these 2 years. The old minister's eyes immediately became wet. He trembled slightly as he took the cup of wine. He said good a few times. So many years of hardship and tiredness. With this cup of wine, it was all worth it. Ning Chen looked at the old minister and sighed softly in his heart. With such an official, Ming Yu's future path should be much easier. The next cup of wine was finally the turn of the few elders of the imperial family. Following that, it was the turn of the various relatives. Ming Yu's speed of toasting was obviously much faster. One cup after another, she quickly finished the formalities. More than half of the Z-hour had passed. It was time for the emperor's wedding to come to an end. The officials left one after another. Su Fian was also brought to the bedroom. Not long after, only Ning Chen, Fan Lingyue, and Ming Yu were left in the entire front hall. Ming Yu could no longer hold back and hugged the little girl. Ning Chen laughed lightly and patted the little girl's back. Ming Yu has grown up. You even have your own empress. You're also laughing at me. Ming Yu wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes and said unhappily. Ha! Ning Chen gently pushed the little girl away and laughed. The jade pendant I gave you. Do you still have it? Ming Yu took it out from around her neck. She had been wearing it all this time. The jade pendant was in the shape of a half moon. It was a gift from Zhangsun. It was also the thing that Ning Chen valued the most. Later on, he gave it to Mingyu. Looking at the jade pendant, Ning Chen bit his finger and activated his martial arts. A drop of dark red blood dripped onto the jade pendant and instantly entered it. Wear it well, Ning Chen said softly. N. Mingyu obediently nodded and replied. At the side, Fan Lingyue looked at Ning Chen's finger. The black blood was faintly discernible. There was no longer a trace of red. The two of them accompanied little Mingyu for a while. In the end, it was time for them to leave. Ning Chen wanted to return to the underworld. Fan Lingyue could no longer suppress his illness. In the midst of little Mingyu's tears, the two of them left together. The moment they left the imperial palace, Fan Lingyue staggered and vomited a mouthful of blood. The blood dyed his blue robes. Chapter 214. Ning Chen summoned the ghost palanquin. The two of them walked in and returned to their respective places. Yang Hong followed behind. He didn't get too close, but he didn't stay too far away either. He always maintained a certain distance. In the ghost palanquin, the two of them were silent. Neither of them said a word. The bright moon peeked out from the clouds and shone down. The ghost palanquin sped through the night and disappeared in an instant. Yang Hong escorted Fan Lingyue to the northern Meng camp before returning to guard Heaven's Gate. Ning Chen didn't stay and returned to the underworld. In the northern Meng commander's tent, Fan Lingyue closed her eyes and said softly, "One last request. After you break through the shackles, guard Ascension Valley for a year. Don't let anyone enter or leave. Same for you. Amitabha." In the tent next to her, the abbot of Dewey Temple chanted a Buddhist mantra and left. In the following 10 days, the northern Meng army kept going south. The Great Xia light cavalry could only harass the enemy and stop them. They didn't dare to clash with the northern Meng army. The two armies fought as they traveled. In front of the Great Xia imperial city, the last major city finally appeared in front of them. In front of Luoyue city, there was a huge mountain stream in the north. It was rugged from east to west, and there was no end to it. The mountain stream was wide, and the terrain was relatively flat. There was no problem for carriages and horses to travel on it. However, a mountain was a mountain, and a stream was a stream. It had always been easy to defend and difficult to attack. It was even more disadvantageous for the cavalry of the northern Meng army. Taking a detour was the best solution. Xia Zi, Duke Jingwu, and the rest thought that the northern Meng army would take a detour and try to avoid this unfavorable terrain. However, Ning Chen still suggested to station all the troops here. He knew very well that Fan Lingyue didn't have much time left. She wouldn't have the time to take a detour. The facts proved that the northern Meng army didn't show any signs of changing their direction. They kept rushing towards Luoyue city. In the northern Meng army, letters were sent out continuously. In the last days of her life, Fan Lingyue tried her best to leave a backup plan for the future of the northern Meng army. She knew that after her death, the people with evil intentions in northern Meng wouldn't be able to sit still. Mingyu wasn't old enough to govern, so she didn't have enough power to suppress these people. In front of the fallen moon city, on the mountain peak, Ning Chen looked at the northern Meng army that was gradually approaching from afar. He pulled the broken death bow in his hand. As the wind and clouds surged, the heaven-sparing arrow was aimed directly at a heavily guarded carriage. Ning Chen had been knocked on the bow for a long time. He had always been decisive when it came to killing, but at this moment, he was struggling in his heart. Once this arrow was shot, the war between the two dynasties would end. With Fan Lingyue's current condition, it was already impossible for him to block this arrow. However, the shooting of this arrow also meant that the Ascension Valley would appear even earlier than before. At the very least, he was certain that Fan Lingyue was determined to prevent the Ascension Valley from being born. However, he did not know what the Eternal Night Cult was thinking. After losing an ally like Beimeng, the Eternal Night Cult would most likely look for a new power to resist the threat of Great Xia. The northern Meng army set up camp 30 miles away from the mountain stream and stopped. Then they set up camp and rested. The figure on the mountain stream disappeared. The last arrow was not shot. Before the war, no one had the right to be emotional. Ning Chun had even almost forgotten how to do things according to his heart. Every action he took had to be made with the most rational judgment and balance. Perhaps, since the beginning of the war, from the moment he decided to protect Great Xia, he was just the awareness Marquis of Great Xia, and not Ning Chun. A person who had lost his heart had already buried his joy and sorrow with his own hands. In front of the mountain stream, the northern Ming army stopped for 3 days. During this period, they sent troops to test the waters many times. The soldiers of Great Xia resisted with all their might, not allowing the northern Ming army to take a step forward. In the commander's tent, Fan Lingyue finished writing the last letter. After asking someone to send it out, she turned her wheelchair and walked out of the tent, looking at the ancient city in the distance. Fallen Moon City. That was the place where she met him for the first time. At that time, she was called Yuling and he was called Ning Fan. That was the biggest oversight in her life. She did not expect that the person she had always wanted to kill was right in front of her. Later, they became friends and she gave him a sword. Not long after that, they met again in the imperial city of Great Xia. He gave her a blood ginseng king. Later, when they found out each other's identity, they became enemies again without hesitation. This was the will of the heavens. The place where they finally understood all their grudges returned to the place where they first met. Do it, Fan Lingyue ordered. Yes. After the order was given, oil was poured on the tails of thousands of horses. Then they set them on fire. The frightened horses immediately neighed miserably and rushed into the mountain stream, as if they had gone mad. The rumbling sound of the horses' hooves shook the entire Fallen Moon stream. Ropes, pits in the ground, hidden stakes, arrows and all kinds of traps were flattened by these crazy horses. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, forming a flat path. Facing the crazy horses, the imperial army of Great Xia had no choice but to retreat again and again, making way for them. Very soon, the northern Ming army appeared and faced the last obstacle of Great Xia, Fallen Moon City. Duke Jingwu and Xia Zi's order was very simple. There were only 2 words. Defend to the death. After Fallen Moon City, Great Xia no longer had any obstacles. Once the northern Ming army entered the imperial city, Great Xia would be finished. The fierce battle between the 2 sides lasted for 2 days. Great Xia had a hard time defending, and northern Ming had a hard time attacking. However, at this crucial moment, Fan Lingyue once again fainted in front of the formation. This made Xia Zi, Duke Jingwu, and the others, who had been tense all this time, unconsciously heave a sigh of relief. Xiao Wanhua took up the role of commander and directed the northern Ming army to attack the city. However, without Fan Lingyue, the battle returned to being equal. The pressure in the hearts of the Great Xia generals was reduced by more than 10 times. The soldiers of the 2 armies constantly suffered casualties in the attack and defense of Fallen Moon City. Day after day, Xiao Wanhua looked at the advisor who was still unconscious in the commander's tent. His eyes changed from worry to nervousness, and finally to sadness, disappointment, and unwillingness. He knew that this battle had already ended. 7 days later, Fan Lingyue woke up. His eyes seemed to be much clearer, and a trace of color gradually returned to his pale face. However, when Xiao Wanhua saw this, the sadness in his eyes became even more intense. Fan Lingyue turned his wheelchair and walked out of the tent. Seeing the towering Fallen Moon City in front of him, he said faintly, "Retreat." Xiao Wanhua's heart ached. He knelt on the ground and said guiltily, "This subordinate is incompetent." "It's not your fault." Fan Lingyue replied calmly and continued, "In the future, Northern Ming will be handed over to you and old Minister Shang. Assist His Majesty well, and don't disappoint me." Xiao Wanhua kowtowed deeply on the ground. Tears flowed down his face, and he didn't raise his head for a long time. Half a day later, the Northern Ming army slowly retreated. The banners no longer fluttered. No one expected the battle to end like this. It was beyond everyone's expectations. There were still tears and unwillingness in the eyes of the Northern Ming soldiers. They had already come to this point, and they were unwilling to accept it. The pleas of the generals didn't move Fan Lingyue at all. He ordered the troops to retreat, and there was no room for doubt. Under the scorching sun, the northern Ming army gradually retreated from Fallen Moon Valley. Xia Zi and Duke Jingwu initially thought that it was a trick. Later, when they saw that the northern Ming army had really retreated, they looked at each other in disbelief. They couldn't believe that the battle had ended like this. Fan Lingyue sat alone in front of Fallen Moon City. He didn't leave with the army. Instead, he calmly looked at this beautiful land. In the end, he still lost to time. Night fell. Ningchen came. Looking at the beautiful figure under the moonlight, he walked over step by step. Looking at the northern Ming army that had already disappeared, Ningchen wasn't surprised. From the third day of Fan Lingyue's coma, he knew that the battle had already ended. No one expected such an outcome. The heavens made a fool of people, causing the originally ridiculous battle to have an even more ridiculous ending. "You're here," Fan Lingyue said softly. "N," Ningchen replied. He walked behind the wheelchair and naturally pushed it forward. No one dared to block their path. One was a sinner of Great Xia, and the other was an enemy of Great Xia. However, after walking into the city, every soldier consciously made way for them. The riverside in the city was no longer as lively as before. However, the scenery was still as beautiful as before. The willow leaves fell into the water, creating ripples in the wind. "How do you think the history books will write about you in the future?" Ningchen asked casually. "What do you think?" Fan Lingyue said softly. "Huh?" Ningchen laughed softly. "A sinner for all eternity." "I think so too." Fan Lingyue laughed softly. The moonlight shone on the ground, sprinkling a slight chill. Unknowingly, the weather had already become so cold. Ningchen pushed Fan Lingyue around the city, just like how she pushed him in the past. It was so natural, as if this was how it should be. Fan Lingyue looked at the beautiful scenery around her, her eyes dark. "I calculated everything correctly, but only your appearance was exposed. As expected, in the end, you still became a huge problem." "I'm not as good as you," Ningchen said calmly. He had always been the one losing in their battles. The number of times he won was very few. Fan Lingyue shook her head. "In the end, you helped Great Xia survive. What's the meaning of the process?" Ningchen was silent. "Do you have any last words?" "Be careful of the Eternal Night cult. Ascension Valley is guarded by the abbot of Dewey Temple. He shouldn't appear in the next year. As for the rest, I'll leave it to you," Fan Lingyue said. Ningchen agreed. The two fell silent again and walked quietly. After a long time, Fan Lingyue's eyes gradually regained their former clarity. Her expression also returned to normal. "Time's up." Fan Lingyue sighed softly. She stood up and walked forward step by step. Ningchen stood in place, a deep sadness flashing through his eyes. Under the moonlight, his blue robes fluttered in the wind. When he took the last step, the chi around him suddenly soared into the sky. A blue pillar of light pierced through the sky, shaking the world. Heavenly Demon Tribulation, Heavenly Fire Tribulation, and Heavenly Lightning Tribulation. 3 tribulations descended at the same time. Thunder shook the sky and fire burned the world. A beautiful figure ignited in the flames, like a blooming blue lotus. At the final stage of her life, she was still so dazzling that it was difficult to look at her directly. 3 tribulations at the same time, a peerless genius. Everyone in the world was shocked by this scene. Since ancient times, there had never been anyone who could reach the heavens in a single step like this, passing 3 tribulations consecutively. If there comes a day when the Eternal Night cult wreaks havoc in the world, and no one can stop them, think of a way to place this scroll into the Eternal Night scripture. This last soul will be my punishment for the world. As she finished speaking, an ancient scroll flew out and slowly landed in front of Ningchen. Thunder and fire roared, drowning out everything in sight. The blue figure gradually disappeared. In the next moment, the pure karma absolute beginning fell and broke with a loud clang. This night, Moonfall City, Lingyue Fall. Chapter 215. In the dark night, the heavenly fire burned toward Ningchen. The chaos scroll trembled slightly, and a faint light appeared. The moment the heavenly fire descended, it immediately stopped, as if it had lost its target and was at a loss. Ning Chen silently put away the chaos scroll and walked away step by step. Xia Zi and Duke Jingwu looked at the departing figure in silence. They didn't say goodbye and didn't ask him to stay. The war was over. The entire Great Xia had no right to ask him to stay. The Great Xia had unbelievably won the war. At the most dangerous moment, such an unexpected turn of events occurred. Under the morning sun, Ning Chen walked forward step by step. It was the first time he stood under the sun after several months, but he didn't feel any joy in his heart. A few days later, Ning Chen returned to the underworld. He silently wrote down the earth scroll and placed it in front of the stone room, where Mu Qingxue was in seclusion. As for the life scroll, he would wait for her to take it. The barbarian dynasty's reinforcements also retreated. They lost 30,000 in one battle, but they still helped the Great Xia a lot. When they left, the barbarian crown prince had an ancient mirror in his hand. It was left by Ning Chen, and asked him to bring it to Man. The news of Fan Lingyue's death quickly spread throughout the world. People were shocked, some were happy, and some were sad. Many people felt regret. They thought that the Great Xia was finished. They didn't expect such a big turn of events. It seemed that the Great Xia's 1,000 years of fortune had not come to an end. The Northern Ming cavalry, Yang Hong at Heaven's Gate, and the Northern Ming reinforcements all retreated into the Northern Ming territory. The news of Fan Lingyue's death was an unprecedented blow to the entire Northern Ming. The war between the two dynasties ended just like that. Great Xia took a deep breath before turning his gaze to the Eternal Night sect. Ning Chen didn't return. He had already taught them how to deal with the martial lords and the heavy cavalry. He didn't want to care anymore. Time passed. After the Great Xia took a breath, they showed the strong foundation of a dynasty that had been unrivaled for 1,000 years. With the Blackwater Army as the main force and the reinforcements from all sides as support, the Eternal Night sect couldn't advance even half a step. After Fan Lingyue's death, the Northern Ming imperial court's spirit was severely damaged. They negotiated peace with the Great Xia with 30,000 war horses and countless treasures as compensation. Great Xia accepted Northern Ming's peace negotiations and did not make things too difficult for them. The few people in power in the imperial court and the Heavenly Mandate Palace were very clear that the little emperor of Northern Ming was personally taught by Ning Chen. They could not ignore him at all. The bad reputation of Jiming Marquis was slowly washed away under the influence of some people. The truth of many matters was revealed step by step and spread throughout the entire Great Xia. However, no matter how guilty the people of Great Xia felt, blamed themselves, and even petitioned, Jiming Marquis never appeared again. Xia Mingri acquiesced to the actions of these people. Although he knew that the prestige of his subjects was too high, and it wasn't a good thing for the emperor, he didn't stop them. Because he knew very well that Ning Chen didn't care about power. He couldn't be a threat to him. In the Weiyang Palace, Zhang Sun never took a step out, and Ning Chen never returned. It was not that he did not want to return, but that he could not. As the days passed, the Great Xia's vitality was also recovering day by day. The Eternal Night cult's offensive was also not willing to confront the Great Xia head-on, and their attacks gradually weakened. The temporary peace in the midst of war was always so precious. Finally, the people didn't have to flee everywhere, and gradually returned to their homes. The names of the soldiers of Great Xia who died in the war were engraved on tombstones one after another. In the temple of the Marquis of Imperial City, 2 more memorial tablets were added. Marquis Wangchuan, Marquis Bloodclad. In the temple of the Marquis of Marquis, there were too many memorial tablets to count. The 1,000 years of peace of Great Xia were all exchanged with the blood and lives of the Marquis. The name of Marquis was above everything. The Marquis token was taken back, and the 2 words Jiming were returned to the ranks of the 10 Marquis. However, Xia Zi, the Grand Preceptor, and the others all knew that this position would be empty forever. He wouldn't come back again. Half a month later, in the Netherworld, a bright red figure broke out of seclusion. The moment she stepped out of the Netherworld, a ghostly aura filled the sky and turned into a light pillar that connected the heavens and the earth. Almost at the same time, another blue light pillar appeared. The aura of utmost evil was cold and oppressive, and instantly swallowed all the life in the surroundings. On this day, two successors of the netherworld stepped into the Xiantian stage at the same time, shocking the entire world. It was also on this day that Ning Chen appeared in front of Underworld Child, who had just broken through to the Xiantian stage. After obtaining the Chaos Scroll, Ning Chen took half a step forward again. He suppressed himself to the edge of the Xiantian stage, but was unwilling to step into it. The two of them fought for an entire day. Underworld Child was no match for Ning Chen and fled. Ning Chen chased him for 1,000 miles, but in the end, he couldn't get rid of this disaster. A few days later, in the Imperial City, Xia Zi broke through the shackles. With the help of the treasure that suppressed the fate of Great Xia in the depths of the Imperial City, he concealed the phenomenon and stepped into the Xiantian stage in a very low-key manner. In the following 7 months, there were many peak rank 9 powerhouses who stepped into the Xiantian stage, such as the Son of God and Jian Yi. The glory of the Great Era was beginning to show signs of appearing. Ning Chen didn't deliberately delay his life. After endless cultivation and battles, the last piece of the red spider lily was consumed. The poison of the yellow spring was getting worse by the day, and his body began to rot and fester again. Ning Chen covered his entire body with black clothes and walked step by step in the southeast of Great Xia, looking for traces of the Heaven Tower. The Chaos Scroll could disturb and hide the secrets of the heavens, but it couldn't penetrate the secrets of the heavens like the Light Scroll. It was very difficult to find the Heaven Tower. However, Ning Chen wasn't in a hurry. He continued to search bit by bit. As long as there was an anomaly in space, he would go in to take a look. Because of this, Ning Chen walked into many forbidden grounds of the great sects and fought fiercely with the guardians of the great sections. The Sword Sect, Yao family of Yu City, and the 3 great sects were all nervous. They didn't understand why the forbidden grounds were exposed. 3 months later, Ning Chen finally found the entrance to the Heaven Tower in an ancient city in the southeast of Great Xia. Just as Ning Shi said, there was indeed a Xiantian stage cultivator in the Heaven Tower. A peerless powerhouse who was on the verge of the second tribulation to the third tribulation, had a shockingly powerful aura. The experts of the Heaven Tower were also shocked by Ning Chen's arrival. The person in front of them clearly had an aura that was infinitely close to the Xiantian stage, but he used some unknown method to suppress his cultivation and refused to enter. Ning Chen came to retrieve Ning Shi's soul. The guardian of the Heaven Tower naturally wouldn't allow him to enter. The two fought fiercely, and the entire space formation was about to collapse. Ning Chen had an undying body. He only attacked and didn't defend. Even though he was injured, he didn't retreat half a step. The guardian of the Heaven Tower was shocked and angry. He was shocked that the person in front of him could actually injure him with his sword. He was angry because this person didn't care about his life, and was clearly trying to drag him to hell with him. In the end, the guardian of the Heaven Tower stopped the battle, and handed over Lan Jun's soul with an ashen face. Ning Chen dragged his injured body and left. He found Ning Shi according to the connection of the soul. After returning it, he left again. Ning Shi couldn't stop him. Tears streamed down her delicate baby face. She knew that this separation might be forever. Ning Chen wanted to see Man one last time, but he didn't know where Senior and Man went. Thus, he could only keep this regret in his heart. He returned to the academy and said goodbye to the master. He also gave the Chaos Scroll to the master. After this meeting, Ning Chen completely disappeared from the Divine Continent. No one knew where he went. In the underworld, Ning Chen kept waiting in front of the stone room. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 10 days later, Ning Chen sighed softly. He flipped his palm and took out the life scroll. Then he left. In the end, he still didn't see her. The ghost girl followed beside him. She sent him to his final destination in a ghost carriage. Outside the Ascension Valley, the residence of the Dewy Temple was no longer there. A year was up. The Buddha in the human world regained his freedom and left 2 days ago. Ning Chen entered the Ascension Valley alone. After a while, the sound of a fierce battle sounded. Killing shook the sky. Sword intent spread in all directions. the mountain collapsed and the ground was devastated. Not long after, a silver pillar of light shot into the sky and stirred up the heaven and earth. Two tribulations in the sky, the heavenly demon tribulation and the heavenly fire tribulation, descended at the same time. The flames in the night illuminated the 9 heavens. It was extremely shocking. At the same time, the sky in the east gradually turned white. Under the first ray of sunlight, the burning heavenly fire instantly turned into a force that could burn the sky and boil the sea. The heaven and earth changed color and enveloped the entire Ascension Valley. Outside the Ascension Valley, a cold wind blew past. It blew the red veil on the ghost girl's head. A drop of tear fell from her beautiful eyes. At the end of the heaven and earth, a man suddenly fainted. Prince Yen, who was suffering from 3 tribulations, was distracted. He immediately vomited a mouthful of blood and dyed the chaotic fog in front of him red. Half a day later, the heavenly fire in the Ascension Valley dissipated. The land within 100 miles was scorched. In the underworld, Mu Qingxue came out of seclusion. His eyes were even colder. The ghost girl waved her hand. The blood-stained life scroll flew out and landed in front of the former. "This is the life scroll you wanted. Where is he?" Mu Qingxue frowned and asked. "Dead." The ghost girl's tone was extremely unfriendly. After answering, she turned around and walked away. She didn't want to talk to him anymore. Mu Qingxue picked up the life scroll. After a long period of nourishment, the life scroll was finally pieced together. However, there were still clear cracks on it. It was mottled with blood. It was abnormally dazzling. Mu Qingxue felt a faint pain in his heart. Gradually, the pain became more and more intense. It was as if something had cut a hole in his heart. It was so painful that it was difficult to breathe. Ugh! A long painful groan was heard. Mu Qingxue's body emitted a snow-white light. After a while, his eyes became clear again. In the distance, the ghost girl stopped. She looked back and suppressed the killing intent in her heart. She said coldly, "The underworld doesn't welcome you. Please leave immediately." Mu Qingxue took the life scroll and left. His eyes were cold and emotionless like before. The underworld became cold and lonely again. The ghost girl lifted the red veil on her head, revealing a delicate and beautiful face. Hell's Rakshasas were born with a face that could cause the downfall of nations and cities, as well as a ruthless heart. The Rakshasa girls often covered their faces because they didn't want others to see their faces. She was the same. He had seen it before. Although it was unintentional, he did see it. However, it was good that he was dead. The tears in the ghost girl's eyes flowed down again. Drop by drop, they fell into the weak water and sank into the water. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.